You are not yet aware that you are a wool porter on this raw March morning in the year 1620, but your body knows the hour before the first light. The darkness in the cottage is complete, except for a single tallow candle burning on the wooden shelf beside the hearth. Its flame leans very slightly toward the shuttered window, where a draught finds a gap in the wattle, bending the smoke into a thin, winding thread that rises and vanishes into the blackened beams. The candle has been burning for some time. A small pool of melted fat glistens at the base of the wick, and the scent of it mingles with the damp wool of your blanket and the deeper, older smell of peat ash that never quite leaves the stones. You lie on a straw mattress laid over a low wooden frame, and the mattress crackles faintly when you shift. Over you is a coarse blanket woven from the wool of the same hardy upland sheep whose fleeces you will soon carry over the hills. The blanket is heavy, and the weight of it presses evenly across your chest and legs. You are fully dressed except for your boots and your outer cloak, because you slept in your woolen hose and your padded doublet to keep the night chill from settling in your joints. The air in the cottage is cold enough that your breath shows as a fine mist when you turn your head toward the candle, and a small steady drip of condensation slides down the inside of the greased parchment that covers the window, catching the flame's light for just a moment before it disappears into the dark. Outside, a light drizzle falls on the packed earth of the yard and on the thatch above you. The sound of it is a soft, continuous hush with no discernible beginning or end, broken only by the occasional heavier drop from the eaves that strikes a stone with a low, musical plop. You have heard this sound every morning for weeks, and your mind no longer separates it from silence. Beneath the drizzle is another, even fainter layer of sound, the distant, muted rush of the beck at the bottom of the village lane, swollen with the meltwater that has been running off the high moor. You push the blanket aside and sit up. The ropes beneath the mattress tighten and groan, a single note that fades as you bring your feet to the cold flagstone floor. The chill rises through your hose immediately, a slow spreading numbness that you have long learned to ignore. You stand, your shadow thrown huge and shapeless across the whitewashed wall by the candle, and you cross to the hearth. The fire is down to embers. You crouch and use a stick of kindling to draw the soft grey ash from the largest remaining lump of peat, revealing a core of deep orange that pulses with a light so faint it seems to be dreaming. You lay a fresh piece of peat on top, then a few dry twigs from the basket beside the hearth. You lean close, your lips nearly touching the ember, and blow a long, gentle stream of air. A wisp of smoke lifts, then a small tongue of yellow flame catches on the twig and begins to spread. You sit back on your heels and watch the fire take hold, the peat beginning to glow along its rough, fibrous edge. The warmth reaches your face in a slow wave, and the skin on your cheeks tingles. On the hearthstone sits a small iron pot of oat pottage, left from the previous evening, congealed into a thick, grey mass. You hang the pot on its hook over the strengthening fire and push the embers closer with your foot. While the pottage warms, you pour a cup of small beer from a brown earthenware jug. The beer is barely fermented, cloudy with yeast, and tastes of bread and the faint bitterness of bog myrtle. You drink it slowly, standing by the hearth, your eyes on the circle of firelight that trembles on the ceiling beams. The room around you is small and spare. One table of dark scrubbed oak, a stool, the bed, a chest for your spare clothes, and a wooden peg on which your hooded cloak hangs, still damp from yesterday's journey across the packhorse track. The walls are of rough stone, pointed with lime mortar that has crumbled in places, and the ceiling beams are black with centuries of smoke. There is a small loft above, reached by a ladder, where sacks of oats and a few tools are stored, but you have no need to go up there this morning. Everything you require is within arm's reach. You ladle the hot pottage into a wooden bowl and eat it standing at the table. The pottage is thick and plain, made from roughly ground oats boiled with water and a pinch of salt. There is no butter, no milk, no honey. You do not miss them because they have never been part of this meal. The spoon, carved from a single piece of horn, feels smooth and warm against your lower lip. You eat without hurry, the pottage cooling as it reaches the edges of the bowl. By the time you have scraped the bottom clean, the pale grey light of the approaching dawn has begun to seep through the cracks around the shutters, and the candle flame has shifted from orange to a weak, translucent yellow. You set the bowl aside, Pull on your thick woolen boots and lace them with leather thongs that pass through iron eyelets. The leather is stiff and still damp from the day before, and you have to tug firmly to draw the thongs tight. You then take your cloak from its peg. It is a heavy garment of fulled wool, dark brown, with a deep hood that falls in folds around your shoulders. The cloak smells of sheep, of rain, of the peat smoke that clings to all fibres in this cottage, and of the faint, metallic tang of the iron brooch that holds it closed at the neck. You swing it around your shoulders and fasten the brooch with a practiced automatic motion that requires no thought. Now you stand in the middle of the room, attending to the final small tasks of departure. You bank the fire so that it will smoulder until nightfall, pushing the fresh peat to the back of the hearth and covering the embers with a heavy layer of ash. You snuff the candle between wetted finger and thumb, a brief, sharp hiss, then smoke, and the room returns to a deep grey dimness. You place your bowl and spoon on the shelf, draw the hood up over your head, and pull the door open. The door is low and heavy, made of vertical oak planks held together by 3 iron straps, and it swings outward onto a small flag step. You step over the threshold into the yard. The drizzle has eased to a fine, clinging mist that beads on the wool of your cloak without penetrating. The light is the colour of old pewter, and it reveals a world of muted shapes. The low dry stone wall that separates the yard from the lane, the hulking outline of the stable at the far end, the bare branches of the rowan tree beside the gate, each twig carrying a line of tiny silver droplets. The yard surface is packed earth, mixed with straw and small rounded cobbles that have been trodden down over many years into a hard, uneven pavement. Puddles fill the hollows, their surfaces absolutely still, reflecting the pale sky as if each one were a small, lost window set in the ground. As you walk toward the stable, your boots press into the soft earth with a quiet, sucking sound that marks the rhythm of your stride. The air is full of the scent of wet stone and the clean green smell of the moss that grows in thick velvet cushions on the north side of every wall. A single jackdaw perched on the stable roof shakes its feathers and makes a low wooden chattering sound, then falls silent. The mist deadens all noise, so even the crunch of your boots is absorbed within a stride. You feel, rather than hear, the presence of the village around you, the low, unseen hum of a place not yet awake, a few chimneys sending up threads of smoke that dissolve into the mist before they can form columns. At the stable door you pause to lift the heavy wooden latch. The door slides open on greased leather hinges, and the warmer air inside flows out to meet you, carrying the scent of horseflesh, hay, and the clean, sharp tang of the dry bracken used for bedding. You step inside and let your eyes adjust to the deeper dimness. The stable has no windows, only narrow slits high in the walls, so the light that enters is soft and indirect, falling in slanting shafts that pick out the steam rising from the animal's flanks. There are 6 horses standing in a row along the stone manger, sturdy Galloway ponies with thick winter coats and broad, unshod hooves. They are not large animals, but their chests are deep and their legs short and powerfully muscled. The kind of horse that can carry 100 weight of wool over a high pass and arrive at the other side with its head still level and its breathing even. They turn their heads as you enter, ears pricked forward, and the nearest one blows a soft, rumbling breath through its nostrils that stirs the dust on the wooden partition. You do not hurry. There is time, a gentle abundance of time before the train must leave. You walk from stall to stall, laying a hand on each warm neck, feeling the coarse winter hair that is just beginning to loosen with the coming spring. You speak no words, because none are required. The horses know you by your step, by the particular weight of your hand, by the smell of your cloak and the way you pause to rub the hollow behind each ear. The second pony, a dark bay with a white star on its forehead, presses its soft muzzle into your chest and you let it rest there a moment, feeling the warm, damp breath soak through the wool. You check each animal's legs, running your hand down from knee to fetlock, searching for any heat or swelling that might indicate a strain from the previous journey. You find nothing but the cool, clean skin over firm tendons. You lift each hoof in turn, using a short, curved iron to pick out the packed mud and small stones embedded in the frobs, working with the quiet, methodical patience of a man who has done this 10,000 times. The ponies stand still, occasionally shifting their weight with a sigh. The iron tool scrapes rhythmically against the horn, and the small clods of muck fall onto the bracken bedding below. The light outside slowly strengthens from pewter to pale silver. Through the stable's ventilation slits, you can see the mist beginning to move, not blowing, but drifting in a lazy, directionless way, as if the whole valley were breathing out. Somewhere beyond the village, a sheep calls, a single plaintive bleat that hangs in the damp air for a long moment and then fades, leaving behind an even deeper quiet. When you have finished with the hoos, you fill the manger with fresh hay from the stack at the back of the stable. The hay is dry and sweet-smelling, a mixture of upland meadow grasses cut the previous summer, with the occasional purple head of clover still visible among the stalks. You also pour a measure of oats from a sack into a wooden bucket and set it aside. The horses will have their feed later, before the bales are loaded, so that they walk on full stomachs and contented minds. Now you lean against the doorpost of the stable and look out into the yard. The mist has risen just enough to reveal the top of the rowan tree and the lower slope of the moor beyond the village, a dark, shapeless shoulder of land that disappears almost immediately into the cloud. The lane is still empty. No dog barks, no door opens, no voice lifts in greeting. The world is reduced to this one man and his horses, the gentle hiss of the drizzle that has returned, and the slow, steady accumulation of grey light. You think of nothing, or rather your thoughts move in the same slow circles they always do at this hour. The order of the loading, the condition of the ropes, the distance to the first rest stop, the look of the sky that promises neither storm nor sunshine, but only the steady, unremarkable weather of the west of the Pennines. These thoughts do not press or demand. They simply drift through your mind like the mist itself, one dissolving into the next without a sharp edge between them. You feel the weight of the day ahead as you feel the weight of your cloak, familiar and not unpleasant. You know every turn of the track, every stone that marks the fording place, every patch of boggy ground where the horses will need to go single file. You know the exact sound the wool bales make when they are properly packed, a solid, almost drum-like thud under your knuckles that tells you the fleeces are tight and the ropes will hold. You know the smell of the river port, damp wood, tarred ropes, the faintly salt tang of the tidal water even this far inland, though it will take another 2 days beyond this one to reach the tides. The first horse, the dark bay with the star, shifts its weight and lets out a long, slow breath that flutters its nostrils. Its eyes are half closed, and the lashes are tipped with tiny beads of moisture. You reach out and scratch the coarse hair of its forehead, and the pony leans into your hand with the full weight of its head. A warm, heavy pressure that is as steady and calming as the sound of the drizzle on the roof. The candle you snuffed inside the cottage has long stopped smoking. The pottage bowl sits on the shelf, the spoon beside it. The embers under their blanket of ash glow dimly in the silent room, and the cottage waits, patient as stone, for your return at the end of the day. But that is many hours away, on the other side of the long, slow climb that will carry you and your horses and your load of wool up into the high passes where the air is thin and the world falls away on both sides into mist and silence. For now you remain in this pocket of calm, standing in the stable doorway with the day just beginning to take shape around you. The horses have finished their hay and stand quietly, heads lowered, the occasional soft stamp of a hoof, the only break in the stillness. You turn the hood of your cloak back just lightly to feel the cool air on your forehead, and the mist lands on your skin like the lightest touch of a feather. There is nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. You are exactly where you are meant to be, in the grey cradle of the morning, between sleep and the long road. In a little while you will walk to the wool store and begin the slow, methodical work of moving the bales. But for now you simply stand and breathe and watch the mist and wait for the light that is coming so slowly it might as well be standing still. The walk from the stable yard to the wool store is short enough that a man could make it in the time it takes for a single cloud to cross the pale disk of the sun, if there were any sun to see. This morning there is none, only the same low, seamless grey that has covered the valley since you opened your eyes. You follow the lane between the high, dry stone walls, your boots finding the familiar ruts and stones with the automatic ease of a lifetime. The mist has thinned just enough to reveal the shapes of the cottages you pass. hunched roofs of stone slate, small shuttered windows, garden plots where the first shoots of kale and onions push through the dark earth. No one else is abroad yet. The village belongs to you and the weather. The wool store stands at the end of the lane where the ground opens into a broader yard shared by the merchant and the smith. It is a long, low building of undressed stone, roofed with the same heavy grey slates that cover every other structure in the parish. Its walls are thick, nearly 3 feet at the base, and the single door is wide enough for a packhorse to pass through if the packs are removed. Above the door, carved into a block of sandstone, is the merchant's mark, a circle bisected by a wavy line that represents the river and the fleece. Though you have looked at it so many times that it no longer registers as a symbol, only as a familiar patch of darker stone above the lintel. You lift the iron latch and push the door inward. It moves silently on greased hinges, and the smell that meets you is one of the oldest and most constant scents of your working life, the dense, animal sweetness of raw wool combined with the sharp, clean tang of the faint, dusty undertone of the timber building itself. The air inside is still and cold, colder even than the outside, because the thick walls and the lack of windows keep the interior at a steady chill all year round. It is a good cold for wool, a preserving cold that keeps the fleeces from overheating or attracting moths. The interior of the storehouse is a single long room lit by 2 lanterns that hang from the central beam on iron chains. Their flames are small and steady, enclosed in cylinders of horn that give the light a warm amber cast, and they illuminate the bales in rows that stretch back into the shadows. The bales are stacked 3 high along both side walls and down the center aisle, leaving just enough room for a man to walk between them with his shoulders brushing the coarse sacking. There are, at this time of year, maybe 40 or 50 bales in the store, each one weighing close to 100 weight, each one representing the fleeces of 20 or 30 hill sheep that grazed the high pastures of the previous summer. You stand for a moment just inside the door and let your eyes adjust. The lantern flames burn without flickering, the air is so still, and their soft glow picks out the texture of the sacking. The wooden frames of the screw press in the corner, the low platform by the far wall where the loaded bales are assembled for the packhorse trains. The floor is of beaten earth, swept clean and scattered with a thin layer of loose wool fibers that catch the light like tiny threads of silver. You walk to the nearest stack of bales and lay your hand on the topmost one. The sacking is rough under your palm, woven from coarse hemp fibers that have been darkened by handling and by the natural oils that seep out of the fleeces inside. The wool presses back against your hand with a firm, springy resistance, and when you push harder, you can feel the dense, matted texture of the fleeces packed tight together. Each bale has been pressed in the wooden screw press that stands in the corner, a tall frame of oak beams with a threaded iron shaft that, when turned, compresses the wool into a solid block roughly 2 feet by 3 feet by 18 inches thick. The compression is so thorough that a bale can stand on its end without slumping, and it takes a sharp knife to cut the twine and release the fleeces, which then expand slowly, like a living thing breathing out. You move along the row, counting the bales you will need for today's journey. The packhorse train can carry 12 large bales, 2 for each of the 6 ponies, plus a few smaller packs of special grade fleeces from the merchant's own flock. You know which bales are destined for the river port because they bear a particular mark, the same merchant symbol you saw above the door, stamped onto a leaden seal that is crimped around the binding cords. You touch each seal as you pass, running your thumb over the raised circle and wavy line, feeling the slight roughness of the lead where it has oxidized to a dull, powdery grey. The seals are cold, always cold, no matter how long the lanterns have been burning. The merchant's clerk, a quiet man who lives in the room above the store, has already left the tally stick for today's load on a small shelf by the door. You pick it up and examine it in the lantern light. It is a stick of split hazelwood, about a foot long, and along its length the clerk has carved notches with a sharp knife. 12 deep notches for the large bales, 3 shallower ones for the smaller packs. The tally stick is the contract, the invoice and the receipt all in one. Later, at the river port, the boatman will take it and break it in 2, keeping one half and giving you the other, so that the merchant can match the pieces when you return and confirm that every bale was delivered. This simple system has worked for generations, and it requires no signature, no seal of wax, no words written on paper. You tuck the tally stick into the inner pocket of your doublet, where it presses against your ribs, a small, hard reminder of the day's obligation. You begin the work of moving the bales. The 12 large ones are stacked in 4 piles of 3, and you start with the pile nearest the loading door at the far end of the store. You take hold of the topmost bale by the binding cords that encircle it, 2 vertical and 2 horizontal, and you lift it off the stack. It is heavy as a full-grain sack, and the weight settles into your shoulders and the small of your back with a familiar, grounding pressure. You carry the bale in front of you, arms wrapped around it, your chin resting lightly on the top edge where the sacking is smoothest. The wool inside shifts slightly with your steps, a minute settling that you feel rather than hear, and the scent of lanolin rises up around your face, clean and somehow soothing, like the smell of warm skin on a cold day. You walk the length of the storehouse, past the other bales and the screw press and the hanging lanterns, to the large sliding door that opens onto the loading platform. You set the bale down on the platform, not with a thump, but with the careful, controlled release of a man who has no wish to strain his back or damage the goods. The platform is a raised wooden deck, level with the floor of the store, extending perhaps 8 feet into the yard. It is covered by a simple lean-to roof of corrugated larch bark that keeps the rain off the assembled bales while they wait for the horses. The platform is empty at this hour, and the wood is damp from the night's drizzle, but not wet. The grain of the planks dark and slick under the grey sky. You return to the stack and lift the second bale, then the third. Each journey is the same. The grip on the cords, the lift that tightens the muscles across your shoulders, the steady walk along the trampled earth floor, the careful set down on the growing pile on the platform. After the third bale, you pause and straighten up, placing your hands on your lower back and stretching gently. A fine, warm ache has settled into the long muscles of your arms, the kind of ache that comes from good, honest work and that will ease as the day goes on. The air in the storehouse is so still that when you breathe out, the small cloud of vapor hangs in front of your face for a full second before dissolving. The lanterns continue to burn with their tiny, unwavering flames, and in the silence you can hear a very faint rustling from the far corner, a mouse perhaps, or a small bird that found its way in through the eaves. You move to the second stack and begin again. The process is repetitive, but the repetition is not tedious. It is a kind of rhythm, a bodily chant of lift, walk, set down, return that clears the mind of all stray thought. On each walk, you notice different small details, the way the light from the left-hand lantern falls across a particular knot in a floor plank, the faint soot mark on the wall where a previous lantern once hung too close to the timber, the single stalk of dried heather that has been pressed into the sacking of the third bale and that quivers with each step you take. These details fill your awareness one at a time, replacing one another without conflict, a slow parade of tiny, meaningless observations that leave no trace. When you carry a bale, the sacking rubs against your doublet with a soft, scratchy sound. The cords cut very slightly into your palms, even through the calluses that have thickened there over years of handling, and you adjust your grip now and again to shift the pressure to a different part of your hand. The bales are not all identical, despite the screw press. Some are slightly more rectangular, some bulge a little at the center, and each one has its own particular balance point, that you find without thinking, the way a man finds the center of a long beam he is carrying. By the time you have moved 6 bales, your body has settled into the work so completely that the boundary between yourself and the task dissolves into a single, unbroken flow of movement. You stop again to drink from a stoneware bottle that you filled at the yard pump on your way here. The water is so cold it hurts the back of your throat, and it tastes of the iron from the pump and the deep mineral richness of the Pennine spring that feeds it. You drink slowly, looking out through the open loading door at the yard. The mist has lifted a little more, and you can now see the smithy on the far side of the lane, its door still closed, its chimney cold. The rowan tree by your cottage is visible too, its bare branches black against the grey sky, and you note without any particular feeling that the wind has not picked up and the drizzle has not returned, which means the high passes may be clear by midday. This is useful knowledge, but it is a gentle background kind of knowledge, the sort that requires no decision. You set the bottle aside and lift the remaining large bales. The last of the 12 is the one that had rested at the bottom of the stack, nearest the screw press, and when you pull off the upper bales to reach it, you see that this one has been wrapped in a slightly finer grade of sacking, the hemp woven more tightly. It is bound with heavier cords and bears 2 lead seals instead of 1. This, you know, is the merchant's special pack, containing the finest fleeces from his own flock, the ones that will command the highest price at the continental markets. You treat it no differently from the others, but you notice the weight is marginally greater and the lanolin smell is a fraction more intense. You carry it to the platform and set it at the end of the row, apart but not separate, ready to be loaded last, so it rides on top of the other bales where it will not be crushed. Now only the 3 smaller packs remain. These are not bales in the true sense, but tightly rolled bundles of the softest lamb's wool, wrapped in linen rather than sacking. Each is the size of a large pillow and weighs perhaps half as much as a full bale. They are stored on a shelf above the screw press to keep them away from the damp floor. You reach up and take them down, one at a time, cradling each bundle in the crook of your arm. The linen is cool and smooth, and through it you can feel the extraordinary softness of the lamb's wool, a texture so fine it seems to melt against your fingertips. These bundles will travel on the gentlest horse, the old grey mare who walks at the center of the train and never shies or stumbles. You arrange the 3 linen bundles beside the 12 bales on the loading platform and step back to survey the day's load. The bales form a neat, solid wall of sacking and cords, their lead seals glinting dully in the thin grey light, and the smaller bundles sit like plump cushions waiting to be placed. Everything is as it should be. The tally stick's notches match the count exactly. The platform is full, the storehouse behind you is a little emptier, and the work of gathering the wool is complete. You lift the lanterns one after the other and pinch out their flames between wetted finger and thumb, the same gesture you used with the candle in the cottage. The smell of hot horn and extinguished wick curls briefly in the darkness, then fades. The storehouse settles into its daytime dimness, lit only by the grey glow from the open loading door. You close the small interior door that leads to the clerk's quarters, making sure the latch catches, and then you step out onto the platform and slide the large loading door shut behind you. The wooden bolt drops into its iron bracket with a soft, definite sound. Now you stand on the platform beside the assembled bales, looking out into the yard and the lane beyond. The village is beginning to stir. A thread of smoke rises from the bakehouse chimney, and you can hear the distant, irregular tapping of the smith's hammer as he kindles his forge for the day. Somewhere, a door opens and closes, and a woman's voice calls out a brief greeting to a neighbor. The sounds are muffled by the damp air, softened around the edges, and they seem to come from very far away, even though they are close. You feel the quiet satisfaction that comes from a simple, well-defined task completed without haste. The bales are gathered, the platform is loaded, and soon you will walk back to the stable yard and lead the horses here for the next stage of the morning's work. But there is no urgency. The riverboat will not leave until the afternoon tide, and the pass will be there all day, grey and patient and unchangeable. You sit for a moment on the edge of the platform, your legs dangling over the side, and you watch the slow drift of the mist as it lifts from the high moor and reveals the dark outline of the hill in ragged, shifting patches. Your hands rest on your knees, palms up, and you notice the faint sheen of lanolin that has coated your skin from handling the bales. It is a thin, greasy film, almost colorless, and it fills the fine lines of your palm and fingerprints with a protective, waterproof layer. You rub your thumb across your fingertips and feel the slight slip, the smoothness, and you think, in a distant, wordless way, of the sheep that grew this wool on the high pastures through the long summer days, their fleeces thickening under the warm sun and the cool rain, and of the shepherds who sheared them, and the sorters who graded the fleeces, and the packers who turned the screw press here in this very room. All those hands, all those hours, compressed into these neat, waiting bales. But the thought passes, as all thoughts do, and leaves behind only the quiet of the morning and the weight of your own hands on your knees and the grey, limitless sky above the yard. The wool is ready. The horses are waiting. The road to the river port stretches away northward, invisible beyond the hills, and you will begin to walk its long spiral path soon enough. For now, The stillness of the platform is enough, and you remain where you are, breathing the cold air, listening to the waking village, and waiting for the day to open fully around you. You walk back along the lane the way you came, past the rowan tree with its 1,000 silver droplets, past the shuttered windows of the cottages where thin threads of peat smoke now rise from every chimney, past the low wall where a patch of grey-green lichen spreads in a perfect circle, like a map of some unknown country. Your boots make the same soft sucking sound on the damp earth, and the mist, which had lifted for a time, settles again around your shoulders with the weight of a second cloak. The lane is so familiar that your feet find the way without your eyes, and your mind drifts into that comfortable emptiness that comes between tasks. The stable yard opens before you as you round the corner by the smithy. It is a square space, perhaps 40 feet on each side, bounded on 3 sides by low stone buildings, and on the 4th by the lane itself. The surface is a mixture of packed earth, rounded river cobbles, and a deep layer of straw chaff that has been trodden into the mud over many seasons, forming a springy, resilient carpet that drains well and never turns to deep mire. In the center of the yard stands a mounting block of 3 stone steps, now green with moss and unused for its original purpose, since you never ride when you lead a pack train. The block serves instead as a seat, a table, a place to set down tools, and at this moment it holds a pair of leather gloves and a small pot of grease. The 6 Galloway ponies stand where you left them, tied to the long iron rail that runs along the stable wall. They have finished their hay, and some have dozed, their lower lips drooping and their hind legs cocked at rest. As you enter the yard, the nearest pony, the dark bay with the white star, lifts its head and pricks its ears forward, then lets out a low, rumbling nicker that is less a greeting than a statement of presence. You acknowledge the sound with a brief touch to the warm flat of its cheek before you turn to the small tack room built into the end of the stable. The tack room is barely larger than a cupboard, with a low door that requires you to stoop. Inside, the smell is of old leather, neat's foot oil, and the faint, dusty sweetness of the bran that is sometimes used to clean the metal fittings. The room is dark, but you know the position of every item by touch. The padded pack saddles hanging from wooden pegs on the left wall, the rolled canvas saddle pads on the shelf above, the coils of hemp rope and the leather surcingles hanging from iron hooks, the wooden box of spare buckles and the curved needles for repairing torn straps. You gather the first pack saddle, lifting it down with both hands. It is a wooden frame, shaped like an inverted V, padded on the undersides with rolls of felt stuffed with horsehair and covered in coarse canvas. The wood is dark with age and smooth from the friction of countless loads, and it weighs perhaps 15 pounds, a manageable burden. You carry the saddle out into the yard and set it on the mounting block, then return for the canvas pads. Each horse will need 2 pads, one placed directly on its back beneath the saddle to prevent rubbing, the other folded over the top of the saddle to protect the bales from the wooden frame. You count out 12 pads, 6 thin and 6 thick, and stack them beside the saddle. Next you bring out the surcingles, 12 long straps of stout leather with iron buckles, each one long enough to pass around the horse's barrel and over the loaded packs. You lay them in a neat coil on the mounting block, and the buckles clink softly against the stone, a sound as gentle as the first drops of rain on a pond. The last items you retrieve are the breast collars and breechings. The breast collars are broad leather bands that pass across the horse's chest to keep the saddle from sliding backward on the uphill climbs, and the breechings are similar bands that curve around the hindquarters to hold the saddle forward on the descents. Together they form a kind of harness that distributes the weight of the load evenly regardless of the slope, and you inspect each one by running the leather through your fingers, checking for cracks or worn stitching. The leather is supple and dark with oil, and it bends easily without creaking. You hang the breast collars and breechings over the rail beside the horses, where they dangle like the limp, patient tails of some resting animal. Now you begin the work of preparing the ponies themselves. You take a stiff bristled brush from the bucket by the stable door, a brush made of boar bristles set into a wooden block, warm smooth on the back from the pressure of your palm. You start with the dark bay, running the brush in long sweeping strokes from the crest of its neck down across the shoulder and along the barrel. The coarse winter coat is thick and slightly oily, designed by nature to shed the rain and hold in the warmth, and the brush raises a fine dust of dried mud and loose hair that drifts away in the still air. The pony stands perfectly motionless, only the slight flick of an ear acknowledging the sensation. You work your way down each leg, lifting the heavy feather of hair at the fetlock to brush away the caked dirt underneath, and the pony shifts its weight with a deep, contented sigh that vibrates through its whole body. You move to the next horse, a sturdy grey with a darker muzzle and a mane that falls in thick, tangled locks. This one is a little more restless, turning its head to watch you with one large brown eye, but it does not pull against the tie. You brush it just as thoroughly, paying particular attention to the area behind the elbows where the girth will lie, because any dirt trapped there could cause a sore on the long journey. The grey's coat is softer than the bay's, almost plush under your fingers, and the brush leaves faint tracks in the hair that slowly fade as the coat settles back into place. You speak a few low, meaningless words, not commands but simply sounds, murmurs that have no content beyond the reassurance of a familiar voice, and the grey's ear swivels toward you, and then relaxes, the tension leaving the muscles of its neck. The third pony is a smaller, compact chestnut with a coat the color of autumn bracken and 4 white socks that reach to just above the hooves. This one is the youngest of the 6, barely 6 years old, and it still has a little of the playfulness of a foal. As you brush its flank, it nudges your shoulder with its nose, a gentle but insistent push that asks for attention. You pause and rub the flat space between its eyes, and the chestnut closes its eyes halfway, the lashes long and dark against the russet face. Then you resume brushing, and it stands quietly, the playfulness satisfied for now. The 4th, 5th, and 6th ponies receive the same care, the slow, methodical brushing that removes the overnight dust, the careful inspection of the skin beneath the hair for any sign of rubbing from the previous day's packs, the gentle lifting of each tail to check for burrs or tangles. These 3 are a matched pair of bays, and the old grey mare who will carry the lamb's wool bundles. The bays are half-brothers, similar in size and build, and they stand side by side with the patient stillness of animals that have worked together for years. The old grey mare has a white face and a swayed back that shows her age, but her legs are clean and her eyes are bright, and she turns her head to watch your every movement with the calm, knowing expression of a horse that has climbed the high pass more times than she can remember. When the brushing is done, you pick up each hoof again, even though you cleaned them earlier in the stable. The yard has added a thin layer of mud to the soles, and you remove it with the same curved iron tool, scraping from heel to toe with a steady, even pressure that the horses accept without flinching. You check the frogs for any embedded stones or bruises, running your thumb over the V-shaped cleft to feel for heat or tenderness. All 6 ponies have hard, healthy feet, the hooves dark and dense and slightly flared at the edges from miles of walking over rocky ground. You set each hoof down gently, pat the flank, and move on. The sky has continued to lighten while you worked, and now the yard is filled with that pale, silvery light that characterizes the early Pennine morning. The mist has risen to just above the stable roof, and through its thinning veil you can see the outline of the moor beyond, a dark, rolling shape that seems to breathe in and out with the drifting vapor. The smith's hammer has stopped, and in the silence that follows, you hear the distant bleating of a flock of ewes moving across a high pasture, a sound so faint it might be a memory. A robin has perched on the top of the mounting block and is watching you with its head cocked, its small black eyes bright and unafraid. It stays there for a long minute, then flies off to the rowan tree in a single dipping swoop. You return to the mounting block and lift the first pack saddle. The wooden frame is cool and smooth under your hands, and you carry it to the dark bay, pausing for a moment to let the horse sniff it. The bay touches the wood with its nose, breathes out once, and then stands still, accepting the familiar object without concern. You place the thin canvas pad across the middle of the bay's back, smoothing it down so that no wrinkles press against the skin. And then you lift the pack saddle and settle it gently on top. The saddle fits into the natural hollow behind the withers, and its wooden bars rest evenly on either side of the spine, leaving a clear channel down the center where the backbone can move freely without pressure. You adjust the saddle forward slightly, then back, finding the exact spot where it sits perfectly still, and you step around to look at it from both sides to be sure. With the saddle in place, you take the first surcingle, and pass it under the bay's belly, just behind the front legs. The leather is wide and flat, and it slides through the iron buckle with a smooth, oiled motion. You pull it snug, but not tight, leaving enough room for 2 fingers between the strap and the horse's chest, and you tuck the loose end through the keeper so it will not dangle. Then you fasten the breast collar, bringing the broad strap across the horse's chest and buckling it to the D-rings on the front of the saddle, adjusting the length so that it lies flat and firm without restricting the movement of the shoulders. The breechings go on last, the strap passing around the hindquarters just below the dock, buckled on the left side where you can reach it easily from the ground. You run your hand along the entire length of each strap to check for even tension, and the bay stands with its head low, its eyes half closed, as if already in a trance of walking. You repeat the process with the grey, then the chestnut, then the 2 half-brothers, and finally the old grey mare. Each horse receives the same careful attention, the same sequence of pad, saddle, surcingle, breast collar, and breeching. By the time you reach the last horse, your hands have fallen into a rhythm so deep that you could do this work in total darkness. The leather straps grow warm under your handling, and the oil in them releases a faint, nutty fragrance that mingles with the smell of horses and moist earth. You tighten each buckle just enough, never too much, because a pack horse must breathe freely on the long climbs, and a strap that is too tight at the start will become painful after the first mile of uphill. The horses, now fully harnessed, stand in a patient row along the iron rail. Their saddles are empty shells waiting to be filled, the canvas pads crisp and fresh, the leather gleaming dully in the soft light. You walk back along the line, checking each animal one final time. You lift the saddle on the chestnut and find that it has settled a fraction too far forward, so you ease it back an inch and retighten the surcingle. You notice that the grey has managed to loosen its breast collar by rubbing against the rail, and you rebuckle it with a gentle pat on the neck that says, without words, that you have seen the small mischief. The old grey mare has not moved at all. Her harness is exactly as you left it, and her eyes are closed now, her lower lip drooping, her breathing so slow and deep that she might be asleep on her feet. You gather the hemp ropes from the tack room. These are the ropes that will secure the bales to the saddles, long coils of 3-strand hemp that have been twisted and stretched and used so many times that they have taken on a permanent, gentle curve. They are stiff to the touch but pliable, and they smell of tar and the faint saltiness of dried sweat from the horses. You lay one coil over each saddle, draping it loosely so that the 2 ends hang down on either side, ready to be tied. The ropes are heavy and rough against strip arms, and as you handle them, you feel the small, fibrous prickles of the hemp fibers, a sensation that is familiar to the point of being comforting. You take a moment now to stand in the center of the yard and survey what you have done. The horses are ready, their harnesses adjusted, their coats brushed clean, their minds as calm as the grey sky above. The pack saddles sit empty, waiting for the bales, and the ropes dangle like the threads of some patient spider's web. The mounting block holds the pot of grease, the spare buckles, and your leather gloves, which you will not put on until the loading begins, because you prefer to feel the ropes against your bare skin when you tie the hitches. The yard is quiet except for the soft, rhythmic swishing of the horses' tails and the distant, constant rush of the beck in the valley bottom, a sound that has been there all along, but that you only now notice because everything else has fallen silent. You feel the morning on your skin, the cool, damp air that carries the promise of a rainless day, the faintest warmth where the mist has thinned enough to let a little diffused sunlight through, the weight of your own cloak on your shoulders, a weight that is indistinguishable now from the weight of your body. You are hungry but not urgently so. You will eat a piece of bread and cheese before you load the horses, but that is still a little while off. For now, the stillness of the yard is a kind of nourishment in itself, a pause between the gathering and the carrying, a small, quiet eddy in the long river of the day. The horses shift and murmur among themselves. The dark bay bends its neck to scratch its knee with its teeth, and the chestnut yawns, a great, slow yawn that shows its yellow teeth and curling tongue. The robin has returned to the mounting block and is pecking at a stray oat that fell from the feed bucket. The mist continues its slow upward drift, and the moor emerges piece by piece, first the long, smooth shoulder of the lowest hill, then the dark line of a dry stone wall climbing the slope, then the pale grey-green of the high pasture where the ewes are grazing. The sky above the moor is a lighter shade of grey now, almost white, and the sun is a vague, luminous disk somewhere behind it, a presence felt rather than seen. You are ready. The horses are ready. The bales wait on the loading platform at the wool store, and the lane stretches between here and there, empty and patient. In a moment you will untie the horses and lead them, one by one or in pairs, to the storehouse for the loading. But you do not rush. You stand in the yard with your hands resting lightly on your hips, your breathing slow and even, and you let the peace of the morning settle into every part of you. The work ahead will be steady and long, but it is not difficult, and it will carry you through the day with the same gentle rhythm that has carried you through every day you can remember. The packhorses are your companions, the road your guide, and the wool your quiet, constant burden. There is nothing else, and there is nothing else needed. You untie the dark bay first, loosening the lead rope from the iron rail with a single pull on the slip knot, and the pony turns its head to follow your hand as if asking whether the time has finally come. It has, and you lead the bay out of the stable yard and along the short lane to the wool store, walking with the same unhurried step that has governed every moment of this morning. The other horses watch you go, their ears swiveling forward and then relaxing, and the old grey mare lifts one hind foot into a resting position, settling in for the wait. The lane is still empty of other people, though the village sounds have grown a little louder. The distant cluck of a hen, the splash of water drawn from a well, the low murmur of voices that carry no distinguishable words. At the wool store, the loading platform stands exactly as you left it, the 12 bales arranged in a neat row and the 3 linen bundles resting on top of the special pack. The platform boards have dried a fraction more, and the wood now shows a subtle grain of grey and silver where the rain has washed away the surface dust. You lead the dark bay alongside the platform, positioning it so that the pack saddle sits level with the edge, and you tie the lead rope loosely to an iron ring set into the stone wall. The pony stands with its head turned slightly toward the bales, sniffing the air with a series of short, quiet breaths that stir the fine wool fibers clinging to the sacking. You pull on your leather gloves, the ones that were resting on the mounting block, and the fingers are still cool from the damp air, but they warm quickly against your skin. The gloves are worn to the shape of your hands, the leather dark and supple at the palms and cracked in fine lines across the knuckles, and they give you a better grip on the rough sacking without blunting the sensitivity you need to tie the knots. You lift the first bale from the platform, the one you placed at the end of the row, and you carry it the few steps to the waiting horse. The bale settles against your chest with its familiar dense weight, and you pause for a moment at the pony's side, adjusting your stance so that your feet are planted firm and your back is straight. Then you lift the bale onto the pack saddle, placing it on the off side first, the side away from you, so that the bale rests against the wooden bars with its flat face outward and its binding cords aligned with the saddle frame. The pony exhales once, a long, slow breath that ruffles the loose fibers on the sacking, and then it stands utterly still. You walk around to the far side and check the bale's position, nudging it backward half an inch so that the weight is centered over the saddle and the horse's center of balance. The bale fits snugly into the curve of the saddle bars, and when you press down on the top, it does not rock or shift. Satisfied, you return to the near side and lift the second bale, which you place on the side closest to you, balancing it against the first so that the 2 bales lean slightly inward toward each other, their upper edges almost touching above the saddle's crest. Together they form a solid, symmetrical load that wraps around the horse's barrel without protruding too far, and when you step back to view the alignment from the front and then from the rear, the bales appear as a single, unbroken mass of sacking and wool, sealed with the merchant's mark. Now you reach for the hemp rope that you had draped over the saddle earlier. The rope is cool and slightly tacky from the tar that preserves the fibers, and it slides through your gloved hands with a faint, gritty whisper. You throw one end over the top of the bales and catch it on the far side, then pass it under the pony's belly just behind the front legs, taking care not to let the rope twist or kink. You pull the end up and over the bales again, and now you have a loop that encircles the entire load and the horse's barrel, a loop that will tighten from both sides when you pull. The process is the same one you have used for more mornings than you can count. The first loop holds the bales together at the chest, the second loop at the flank, and the third over the top to compress them downward. You work the rope through the iron rings on the saddle and pull it snug, not with a sudden jerk, but with a steady, even pressure that brings the bales closer together and takes the slack out of the line. The sacking creaks softly as the bales compress, and you feel the resistance through the rope, a living tension that tells you the load is beginning to settle. You tie the diamond hitch now, a knot that looks complicated to anyone who has not tied it 1,000 times, but that is, for you, as simple as breathing. You form a loop in the standing part of the rope, pass the working end through the loop, draw it up and over the top of the bales, then down through the saddle ring on the far side, and up again to meet the loop on top. You pull the working ends through the center of the diamond shape you have created, and as you tighten it, the rope grips itself in a way that will not slip, no matter how much the load sways or jolts. The diamond hitch is the lock that holds everything together, and when you finish it, the rope lies flat and neat across the canvas pads, its fibers pressed into a pattern that your fingers have impressed on countless loads before this one. You stand back and let your breathing slow. The dark bay turns its head as if to see what you've done, and you stroke its neck once, a brief automatic gesture that has no meaning beyond the simple contact of hand on warm hide. The pony's coat is already beginning to steam very slightly under the edges of the canvas pads, a sign that the extra weight has called its body to wakefulness, and you note this without concern because you know the horse will warm into the load as it walks, and the day will not be hot enough to cause overheating. You untie the lead rope and walk the loaded bay a few paces forward into the yard, where you tie it to a post set aside for this purpose. The pony walks with a slightly shorter, more deliberate stride, now that the bales are on its back, but its head is still level and its ears are still relaxed. You leave it there and return to the stable yard for the second horse. The grey pony is next. You lead it along the same short lane, and it walks with a looser, more rolling gait than the bay, its head swinging gently at each step. At the platform, you position it beside the next 2 bales in the row and tie it. Then you go through the same sequence. Lift the first bale, settle it on the offside. Lift the second bale, settle it on the near side. Adjust, rope, tighten, hitch. The grey stands a little less steadily than the bay had, shifting its weight from one hind foot to the other while you work. But you place a calming hand on its flank and murmur a low sound, and the pony stills. The rope work on this horse feels slightly different because the grey's barrel is a fraction rounder, which means the surcingle needs an extra inch of tension to sit flush against the ribs. You pull that inch, testing the give with your fingers, and then you tie the diamond hitch with the same automatic precision, watching the rope settle into its familiar angular pattern against the pale canvas. The next is the chestnut, the young one, and you take a little extra care here. The chestnut has a narrower chest and higher withers than the others, and if the bales are placed too far forward, they will press on its shoulders and cause it to shorten its stride. You lift the first bale and hold it a moment, gauging the saddle's position. Then you set it down a hand's breadth further back than you normally would. The chestnut flicks its ears backward and forward, but does not move, and when you place the second bale on the near side, you see that the load sits perfectly, the weight distributed just behind the withers where the back is broadest. You tie the ropes, and as you pull the diamond hitch tight, the chestnut yawns again. That same slow, jaw-stretching yawn you saw in the stable yard, and you take it as a sign of acceptance. The 2 half-brother bays come one after the other, so similar in build that you could almost swap their loads without adjusting a single strap. You load the first of them, tying the bales down with a rhythm that has become so deeply ingrained that your hands seem to work independently of your mind. While you pull the rope through the ring, your eyes drift to the sky, which is now lightened to the color of skimmed milk, and to the moor that is fully visible now, its long, gentle slopes rising in overlapping waves of brown and dull green. The second bay follows, and as you tie the diamond hitch on its bales, you notice that the rope has begun to fray slightly near the end, a few loose hemp fibers curling away from the main twist. You will need to replace this length before the next long journey, but it will hold for today, and you make a mental note that is so small and calm it barely registers as a thought. The old grey mare is the last. You have saved her for the end because she will carry the 3 linen bundles of lamb's wool in addition to her regular bales, and the loading of the soft goods requires a different arrangement. You lead her to the platform with a hand resting lightly on her neck, and she walks with the slow, measured gait of a horse that knows every stone of the yard. You load the 2 large bales first, placing them on the off and near sides exactly as you did for the others, and you tie them down with the usual ropes and hitch. The old mare does not stir except to blink her long, pale lashes, and the weight of the bales seems to settle into her as if she had been waiting for it all morning. Now you take the 3 linen bundles. They are so light compared to the bales that you can lift 2 at once, one tucked under each arm, and you place the first on top of the mare's load, directly over the crest of the saddle between the 2 larger bales. The bundle sits there like a plump pale pillow, its linen wrapping smooth against the coarse sacking below. The second bundle goes beside it, and the third on top of the first 2, in a small stable pyramid. You tie these down with a separate, lighter rope that you keep specifically for the top packs, a rope that is thinner and softer than the main hemp lines. It passes over the top of all 3 bundles, down through the saddle rings, and back up to be tied in a simple, flat knot that holds the bundles snugly in place without crushing the delicate lamb's wool inside. When you finish, the old grey mare carries a load that is taller than any of the others, but not heavier, and she stands beneath it with the same placid stillness she has shown all morning. All 6 horses are now loaded. You lead the old grey mare to the waiting post and tie her beside the others, and you take a moment to walk slowly along the line, examining each load from both sides. You check the ropes for even tension, sliding a finger under each one to test the give. You check the bales for any sign of slippage, pushing against them with the flat of your hand to confirm that they are locked solidly in place. You check the lead seals on each bale, counting them silently to yourself, making sure that every seal that was on the platform is now on a horse and that the tally stick's notches still match the number of seals. They do. The loads are balanced, the ropes are tight, the horses are calm, and the wool is ready to travel. The yard has grown a little warmer, enough that you can feel the difference on your cheeks and the tips of your ears. The mist has vanished entirely, dissolved into the pale sky, and the moors beyond the village are sharp-edged now against a background of soft white cloud. A light breeze has picked up, the first breath of wind all morning, and it carries the smell of wet earth and the distant, clean scent of the high heather that awaits you on the pass. The robin has returned to its perch on the loading platform and is singing a short, repetitive phrase of 3 notes that sound like water dropping into water. You remove your gloves and tuck them into your belt. Then you lift the stoneware bottle and drink the last of the cold water. The iron tang of the pump has mellowed, and the water is now just cool and still, filling your mouth and throat with a simple, clean absence of thirst. You set the bottle on the platform where the storehouse clerk will collect it later, and you rest your hands on your hips, looking at the loaded train. The ponies stand in a line, their packs rising above their backs like a row of small, neat hills, the hemp ropes crossing and recrossing in geometric patterns that catch the light. The horses themselves are almost invisible beneath the loads, just legs and heads, and swishing tails protruding from the mass of sacking and canvas, and they have settled into the waiting stillness of animals that understand that work is about to begin. The dark bay rests one hind leg, the grey cocks its ear toward a distant sound. The chestnut rubs its nose on its knee, the half-brothers stand shoulder to shoulder, and the old grey mare simply waits, her eyes half closed, her breathing so slow that the linen bundles rise and fall as gently as a sleeping child's chest. You feel the day opening around you like a door onto a vast, quiet room. The loading is complete, the morning's second task finished with the same slow care as the first, and now only the journey itself remains. You will walk the train out of the village soon, past the bakehouse and the churchyard, past the last dry stone wall and onto the track that climbs toward the high pass. You know every step of that road, every stone and every turn, and you know the feel of the loaded horses walking behind you, their hooves making a steady, 4-part rhythm on the earth. You know the sound the ropes will make as they stretch and settle in the first mile, a soft, musical creaking that will gradually fall silent as the load finds its final shape. You know the way the morning light will change as you climb, thinning and cooling, the air growing sharper, the sky seeming closer, the world behind you shrinking into a pattern of pale fields and winding walls. But you are not in a hurry to begin. There is a pause here, a small pocket of stillness between the loading and the departing, and you let it last. The horses are ready, and they do not mind waiting. The wool is heavy and secure, and it does not mind waiting either. The road will be there when you take it, as it has been there every morning you can remember. So you stand in the yard with the loaded ponies, your hands quiet at your sides, and you breathe the cool, damp air of the Pennine morning, and you wait for the exact moment when the stillness itself tells you it is time to go. The stillness in the loading yard does not break so much as it slowly, gently tips over into motion. You walk to the post where the dark bay stands waiting, its loaded bales rising above its back like the roof of a small square hut, and you untie the lead rope with a single unhurried pull. The knot loosens under your fingers and the rope falls free, its end brushing the damp ground before you coil it loosely in your hand. The bay lifts its head a fraction, the white star on its forehead catching the pale light, and it shifts its weight from one hind foot to the other, a small preparatory movement that tells you it is ready. You do not speak, because no command is needed. You simply turn and begin to walk toward the lane, and the bay follows, the rope slack between you. Behind the bay, the grey pony is tied to the bay's pack saddle by a short lead rope that runs from the grey's halter to a ring on the back of the bay's load. The grey in turn leads the chestnut, and so on down the line, each horse fastened to the one before it by a length of rope just long enough to allow a comfortable walking distance without tangling. You checked these connecting ropes when you loaded the horses, running each one through your hand to ensure it was neither twisted nor worn. And now the whole train is a single, linked chain of muscle and wool and leather, 6 horses and 1 man joined by hemp and habit. As the bay moves, the grey feels the gentle tug on its halter and steps forward, and the chestnut follows the grey, and the half-brothers follow the chestnut, and the old grey mare comes last, walking with the slow, deliberate dignity of age at the tail of the train. The sound of the departure is a composite of many small, soft noises. The hooves press into the packed earth of the yard with a series of wet, sucking sounds, each step lifting a little of the mud that has been churned by the morning's work. The leather of the harnesses creaks in a dozen places at once, a low, rhythmic chorus of tiny groans that rise and fall with the movement of the horses' shoulders. The bales rub against one another with a faint, scratchy whisper as the loads settle into the new rhythm of walking, and the loose ends of the ropes sway and tap lightly against the canvas pads. Somewhere in the train, a buckle that is not quite snug against its strap gives a single, musical clink with every third step, a small sound that repeats so regularly it becomes part of the silence. You walk at the head of the bay, your left hand holding the lead rope with a loose, easy grip, your right hand swinging naturally at your side. The bay's head is level with your shoulder, and you can feel the warmth of its breath on your upper arm when it exhales, a soft, moist puff that comes and goes in a steady rhythm. The rein is made of the same dark, oiled leather as the rest of the harness, and it is smooth and slightly warm from the heat of your hand. You do not pull on it, you merely hold it, and the horse understands the light, constant pressure as a signal to keep its pace even and its direction true. The lane opens before you, a pale ribbon of packed earth and occasional cobbles that winds between the high dry stone walls. The walls are old, much older than any living memory in the village, and their stones are covered with a thick, cushiony layer of grey-green moss that gleams with moisture. In the crevices between the stones, small ferns have taken root, their fronds uncurling in tight green spirals that tremble when the air moves. Every few yards a stone has fallen from the top of the wall and lies half buried in the grass at its foot, covered with the same moss, slowly sinking into the earth. You have passed these fallen stones so many times that you know each one by its shape, the one that looks like a loaf of bread, the one with the white vein of quartz running through it, the one that is almost perfectly round. The first cottages appear on your right, their stone walls rising directly from the edge of the lane with no garden or yard to separate them from the passing world. Their windows are small and deeply set, covered by wooden shutters that are still closed at this hour, their surfaces dark with the damp of the night. Through the gaps in the shutters, you can see the faint orange glow of a hearth fire in one cottage, and the thin line of smoke that rises from its chimney leans sideways in the breeze, then straightens, then leans again, as if it cannot decide which way to go. The thatch roofs are thick and rounded, their edges trimmed neatly where they overhang the walls, and they are the color of old straw, a dull brownish gold that darkens to almost black where the rain has soaked in most deeply. A single drop of water clings to the tip of each straw and catches the light for just a moment before it falls, and another drop forms to take its place. You pass the first cottage, then the second, then the third, and the lane bends slightly to the left, following the contour of the hill. The puddles in the lane are wide and shallow here, their surfaces so still and undisturbed that they reflect the pale grey sky with perfect fidelity, each one a small rectangular mirror set into the earth. As the dark bay walks through the edge of a puddle, the water ripples outward in a series of neat concentric rings that spread and fade and spread again, and the reflected sky breaks into 1,000 shifting fragments of silver and grey before slowly reassembling itself into stillness behind the last horse's tail. The hooves come down with a soft, liquid slap, and the water that splashes up is cold and clean, darkening the hem of your cloak and spotting the bay's white fetlock with tiny dots of mud. The bakehouse is the next landmark, and you smell it before you see it. The scent of baking bread drifts across the lane in a warm, yeasty cloud that cuts through the cold air and settles in the back of your throat, rich and faintly sour and deeply comforting. The bakehouse is a low stone building with a chimney twice as wide as any of the cottage chimneys, and the smoke that rises from it is thick and white and full of the smell of burning wood and hot flour. The door stands open a crack, and through it you glimpse the orange glow of the brick oven and the shadow of the baker moving slowly, heavily, his arms white with flour up to the elbows. He does not look up as you pass, and you do not call out to him because this is not a time for words. The train moves past the bakehouse, and the smell of bread fades slowly, replaced again by the clean, damp scent of stone and moss and wet earth. Beyond the bakehouse, the lane widens slightly to accommodate the village well, a circular stone structure with a wooden windlass and a roof of slate that shelters the water from falling leaves and birds. The bucket hangs on its rope, dripping slowly into the dark circle of water below, and each drip makes a small hollow sound that echoes up from the depths. A woman is drawing water as you approach, her back bent to the windlass handle, and she straightens up as the train passes, her hands resting on her hips. She watches the horses go by with a quiet, expressionless face, her eyes moving from the lead bay to the grey, to the chestnut, to the half-brothers, to the old grey mare. Counting the bales, perhaps, or simply following the slow, steady procession, because there is nothing else to look at. You lift your hand in a small, wordless greeting, and she lifts hers in return, and then the train has passed, and the well is behind you, and the lane narrows again. The churchyard comes next, a square of rough grass and leaning headstones enclosed by a low wall of the same grey stone as everything else. The church itself is small and plain, with a square tower that holds a single bell, and the bell is silent now, hanging motionless in its dark arch. The yew tree stands at the corner of the churchyard, ancient and vast, its trunk thick and deeply grooved, its branches spreading outward in a dense dark canopy that drips steadily, even though the rain has long since stopped. The drops fall from the needle-like leaves in a slow, irregular rhythm, some hitting the stone wall with a sharp tap, others landing on the soft grass with no sound at all. The grass beneath the yew is sparse and yellow, starved of light, and the ground is covered with a layer of fallen needles that have turned brown and crisp and give off a faint, resinous scent when crushed. You pass the yew, and a single drop lands on the sleeve of your cloak, spreading into a small dark circle that slowly fades as the wool absorbs it. The lane now runs alongside the churchyard wall for a short distance, and here the stones are older and more irregular, covered with a thicker layer of moss and studded with small round cushions of a different brighter green lichen that grows in perfect circles. The wall is so low that you can see over it into the churchyard, and your eyes pass over the rows of headstones, some standing straight, others leaning at angles, their inscriptions worn smooth by wind and rain and time. The names on them are the names of the village, the same names that are spoken today in the cottages and the fields, and you know many of them without having to read the letters. They are not sad to you, these stones. They are simply part of the landscape, as much a part of it as the walls and the moss and the slow dripping yew. The last cottages of the village come into view, and these are smaller and more scattered, set back from the lane with little guns where the first green shoots of the year are pushing through the dark soil. A dog lying in the doorway of one cottage lifts its head as the train passes, its ears pricking forward, and then it lowers its head again onto its paws and closes its eyes. A child's voice calls out from somewhere behind a wall, a high, bright sound that hangs in the air for a moment and then is gone. A door opens and closes with a soft thud, and the sound of a latch falling into place is followed by the creak of a shutter being pushed open. The village is waking up, but slowly, gently, without any hurry at all. The bales sway with each step of the horses, a slow, pendulum motion that is almost hypnotic to watch. From your position at the head of the train, you can turn your head and see the line of loads stretching back behind you, each one moving in its own slight, individual rhythm, but all of them linked by the common forward motion of the train. The dark baize load sways a little to the left with each step of its right hind leg, and the grey's load sways a little to the right in counterpoint, and the chestnut's load hardly sways at all because the young horse walks with a particularly smooth, flat-footed gait. The linen bundles on top of the old grey mare's load bob gently, their soft, rounded shapes shifting minutely against the ropes that hold them, and the mare's tail swishes back and forth in a slow, steady arc that brushes the flies away, though there are no flies this early in the year. The light has changed since you left the loading yard. The sun has still not broken through the high, thin layer of cloud that covers the sky, but the cloud itself has grown lighter, its colour shifting from pewter to a pale, milky white that seems to glow from within. The shadows are soft and diffuse, barely there, and the whole world is lit with a flat, even radiance that makes colours seem deeper and textures more pronounced. The moss on the walls is a richer green now. The wet stones are almost black. The pale straw of the thatch is touched with gold, and the dark wool of the bales has a deep, chocolatey warmth that it did not have in the grey dawn. You notice these things without remarking on them. The way you notice the change in the sound of the hooves as the lane surface shifts from packed earth to a short stretch of cobbles. The cobbles are rounded and smooth, worn by centuries of feet and hooves and cartwheels, and they are set into the earth in a rough, uneven pattern that makes the horses step more carefully. The hooves strike the stone with a sharper, more definite sound here. A series of clean, hard clops that ring out and then fade, and the iron shoes of the two horses that wear them throw up the occasional pale spark that dies before it hits the ground. The dark bay puts its head down slightly to watch its footing, and you give it a little more rein, letting it pick its own path across the uneven surface. The cobbled stretch lasts for perhaps 50 yards, and then it gives way again to packed earth, and the sound of the hooves softens back into the familiar, wet squelch that has been the rhythm section of the journey so far. The last dry stone wall of the village comes up on your left, and this one is different from the others because it has a style built into it. A simple arrangement of flat stones that project from the wall like steps, allowing a person to climb over without disturbing the sheep that the wall was built to contain. The style is old and worn, the stones hollowed in the center by the passage of countless feet, and a small puddle has collected in the hollow of the topmost stone, reflecting the sky just like the larger puddles in the lane. Beyond the wall, the fields open out, rough pastures of coarse grass and reeds, where a few sheep are grazing with their heads down, their fleeces the same grey-brown as the winter hillside, their legs so short that they seem to float on the grass like small, woolly boats. You pause at the stile, though not to climb it. You pause because this is the last point in the village from which you can see the whole of it spread out behind you, and you turn and look back, the lead rein still loose in your hand, the dark bay standing patient and still at your side. The village lies cupped in the shallow valley, its roofs and walls and chimneys, a soft, muted palette of greys and browns and greens, the smoke from the bakehouse and the cottage hearths rising in thin, vertical columns that bend and merge as they meet the moving air above the rooftops. The church tower stands above the yew tree, and the well is a small dark dot beside the bend in the lane, and the stable yard is hidden behind the row of cottages, but you know exactly where it is. The whole scene is quiet and small and complete. A little world enclosed by hills and walls and mist, and you look at it for a long, slow moment without any particular thought, just letting the image settle into your mind like a stone settling into a stream. Then you turn back to the road ahead. The lane has become a track now, narrower and rougher, its surface less defined, its edges blurred by the encroaching grass and heather. The stone walls on either side have grown lower and more tumble down, and here and there a gap has opened where the stones have fallen away entirely, leaving only a low, scattered rubble through which the sheep wander freely. The track begins to climb, very gently at first, a barely perceptible incline that you feel more in your legs than you see with your eyes. The horses lean into the slope, their strides shortening a little, their heads lowering, and the loads on their backs tilt forward by a fraction of an inch. The ropes creaking once as they adjust to the new angle. The sound of the village fades behind you, one layer at a time. First the voices, then the barking of the dog, then the distant clank of the smith's hammer, until all that remains is the sound of the train itself. The steady, four-part rhythm of the hooves and the creak of the leather and the soft sibilant whisper of the bales swaying. The air grows fresher and cooler as you climb, and the scent of the moor begins to assert itself over the village smells of smoke and bread and stone, the clean, sharp tang of wet heather, the earthy richness of peat, the faint sweet fragrance of the gorse that grows in low, spiny clumps along the track, its yellow flowers just beginning to open. A curlew calls somewhere far out on the moor, its long, liquid note rising and falling and rising again, a sound so pure and lonely that it seems to draw the whole landscape into itself. You walk on, the lead rein still held loosely in your left hand, your right hand swinging easy at your side, your boots finding the familiar ruts and hollows of the track. The dark bay walks beside you, its breath coming in steady, visible puffs that hang in the cold air for a moment before dissolving. Behind you, the grey and the chestnut and the half-brothers and the old grey mare follow in their patient link chain, their hooves falling into the same slow, endless rhythm that has carried countless packhorse trains over these same hills, season after season, year after year. The world is very quiet now, and the day is still young, and the high pass waits somewhere ahead, hidden in the pale, featureless sky. The track begins to change beneath your feet almost as soon as the last cottage of the village has faded into the grey distance behind you, and the change is so gradual that you do not notice it happening until it has already happened. The packed earth of the lane, which was smooth and firm and marked with the parallel grooves of cartwheels, gives way by inches to a rougher surface of loose stones and exposed cobbles that have not been pressed down by generations of village traffic. The stones are smaller here than the great rounded cobbles of the village centre, sharp-edged and angular, broken from the hillside by frost and weather rather than worn smooth by water. They shift slightly under your boots with a dry, grating sound that replaces the soft squelch of the lower lane, and you adjust your stride without thinking, placing each foot a little more carefully to avoid turning an ankle. The dark bay at your side does the same, its head dipping lower as it watches the ground, its large dark eyes scanning the track with an attention that is not anxious but merely practical. The pony's hooves, which are unshod and hard as iron, find the gaps between the sharper stones with a precision that comes from a lifetime of walking these same upland paths, and the sound they make changes too, a series of small hard clicks and scrapes rather than the wet thuds of the lane. Behind the bay, the other 5 horses adjust their own gaits to the new surface, their harnesses creaking in a different key as they shift their weight and shorten their strides, and the bales on their backs sway with a slightly sharper, more angular motion than the smooth pendulum swing of the village street. The walls on either side of the track have dwindled now to little more than low, tumbled lines of stone that barely reach your knee. Beyond them, the moor opens out on both sides, a vast rolling expanse of heather and coarse grass and dark patches of bare peat that stretch away into the misty distance without a single tree or building to interrupt the line of the horizon. The heather is still in its winter colors, a deep, muted brownish purple that looks almost black where the shadows gather in the hollows, and it is speckled with the brighter green of new bracken shoots that are just beginning to push through the old dead fronds of the previous year. The grass is coarse and tussocky, growing in uneven clumps that tremble in the light breeze, and between the clumps the ground is bare and dark, studded with small round pebbles of white quartz that catch the pale light like chips of bone. A heavy mist has settled on the moor while you were climbing, though you cannot say exactly when it arrived. It is not the thin, drifting mist of the early morning in the village, but a thicker, blanker vapor that hangs low over the land and absorbs all sound, softening every noise into a muffled, distant version of itself. The hooves of the horses behind you sound farther away than they are. The clink of the loose buckle that you noticed in the yard is now barely audible, a tiny, ghostly chime that seems to come from somewhere off to the side, rather than from the train itself. Even your own breathing is quieter, the mist wrapping around your face and filling your ears with a soft, cottony silence that makes you feel as if you are moving through a substance thicker than air. The gradient of the track has been increasing so gently that you have not had to change your pace. But now, as the last of the lane cobbles disappears beneath a layer of peaty earth and tussock grass, you feel the slope in your legs. It is not a steep climb, nothing like the high pass that waits ahead, but a steady, constant pull that works the muscles of your calves and thighs with a slow, rhythmic burn. You lean forward very slightly, your body adjusting to the angle, and the dark bay leans forward too, its shoulder pressing into the breast collar with a new, more determined tension. You can hear the horses breathing now, a deep, regular pulse of air that comes in time with its steps, and the sound is steady and unlabored. The breathing of an animal that is working but not straining, finding its long-distance rhythm. The track curves to the right, around the shoulder of the hill, and as you follow the bend, the view changes, though there is not much to see. The mist has closed in on all sides, reducing the visible world to a circle perhaps 50 yards across, a small moving bubble of grey light and dark heather that travels with you as you walk. Beyond the edge of this circle, everything dissolves into a soft, featureless whiteness that might hide anything or nothing at all. You could be the only man on earth walking a track that leads to nowhere, a road that exists only as far as you can see it, and then vanishes behind you as soon as the last horse has passed. The feeling is not lonely. It is simply a fact, a neutral quality of the landscape that asks no response from you. The ground underfoot continues to change as you climb higher. The loose stones become less frequent, replaced by stretches of bare peat that have a dark, spongy texture and that squelch softly under the weight of the horses. The peat is made of centuries of compressed moss and heather, and it smells of ancient, waterlogged earth. A rich, dark scent that rises up around your boots with every step. Here and there, the peat has been cut away in long rectangular trenches where the villagers have dug turfs for the winter fires, and the edges of these cuttings are sharp and black and glisten with moisture. You steer the train around them, guiding the bay along the firm ground between the trenches, and the other horses follow without deviation, stepping exactly where the bay stepped, as if their hooves are drawn along the same invisible line. The mist condenses on the wool of your cloak, forming a fine silvery beading that does not soak through, but merely rests on the surface, each droplet a perfect, tiny sphere that catches the diffuse light. The same beading forms on the sacking of the bales, on the canvas pans of the saddles, on the rough winter coats of the horses, and the whole train is gradually coated with a layer of shimmering moisture that makes everything look soft-edged and slightly unreal. The dark bay's mane, which is thick and coarse and usually falls in a stiff crest, now hangs in damp, separate strands that cling to the side of its neck, and its ears flick back and forth occasionally to shake off the droplets that gather on the tips. You pause for the first time since leaving the village. The track has reached a small level shelf where the hill flattens out for a few dozen yards before climbing again, and here there is a stone trough built into the side of the slope, a simple rectangular basin carved from a single block of local sandstone. It is fed by a spring that rises somewhere higher up the hill and flows down through a channel of mossy stones, and the water that spills into the trough is clear and cold and makes a soft, trickling sound that cuts through the muffled silence of the mist. The trough is old, its edges worn smooth by the lips of countless horses, and the ground around it is churned into a deep, permanent mud that has been trodden and retrodden into a series of overlapping hoofprints now filled with water. You lead the bay to the trough and let it drink. The horse lowers its head slowly, its nostrils flaring as it sniffs the water, and then it dips its muzzle into the cold, clear surface and begins to drink in long, slow draughts. The water gurgles softly as it passes through the horse's lips, and the muscles of the bay's throat move in a steady, rhythmic swallow that you can see beneath the wet hair of its jaw. You stand beside the horse, your hand resting lightly on its neck, and you feel the warmth of its skin rising through the damp wool. A steady, living heat that is deeply comforting in the chill of the high moor. The mist drifts around you both, and the sound of the spring fills the small clearing with its constant, gentle voice. When the bay has drunk its fill, it lifts its head and stands with water dripping from its muzzle, its eyes half closed, its breathing slow and even. You lead it aside and bring the grey pony forward, and then the chestnut, and then each of the others in turn, letting every horse drink for as long as it wants. The horses drink with different manners. The grey is noisy and splashy, blowing bubbles in the water before sucking it up, while the chestnut is delicate and precise, barely disturbing the surface with its lips, and the old grey mare drinks with a slow, patient deliberation, taking small, careful sips as if savouring each mouthful. The half-brothers drink together, their heads side by side over the trough, their ears flicking in unison at some small sound that you cannot hear. The water level in the trough drops by perhaps an inch by the time all six have finished, and the overflow channel at the far end carries the excess away in a thin silver trickle that winds down through the heather and is quickly lost in the mist. While the horses drink, you stand by the spring and listen to the water. It rises from a cleft in the rock a few yards above the trough, a small dark opening where the moss grows thick and emerald green, and it falls into a shallow stony pool before spilling over into the channel. The sound it makes is complex and layered, a high, bright trickle as it leaves the rock, a lower, liquid gurgle as it passes through the pool, and a soft, rushing murmur as it flows down the channel to the trough. These three sounds combine into a single, continuous music that has no melody but that fills the ear with a gentle, pleasing whiteness. A sound that seems to wash away all other thoughts and leave only the quiet presence of the water itself. You kneel beside the pool and cup your hands to drink. The water is so cold that it makes your teeth ache for a moment, and it tastes of stone and moss and the high, clean air of the moor, a taste that is almost not a taste at all, but rather the absence of any taste other than pure, cold wetness. You remain kneeling by the spring for a little longer than you need to, your hands resting on your knees, the cold water still dripping from your chin. The mist has thickened slightly while the horses drank, and now the edges of the clearing are softer than before, the heather and the rocks fading into the white air with no clear boundary. The silence is almost complete, broken only by the sound of the water and the occasional soft stamp of a horse's hoof as it shifts its weight. There is no bird song here, no wind, no distant bleating of sheep. The moor at this height is a place of deep suspended quiet, as if the whole landscape is holding its breath. The scent of the place is as layered as the sound of the spring. The damp heather gives off a faint honeyed fragrance that mingles with the sharp, clean smell of the wet rock, and underneath both is the rich, earthy odor of the peat, a smell that speaks of slow, patient decay, of centuries of moss and root and water compressed into a dark, fibrous mass. There is also the smaller, closer smell of the horses, the warm, animal scent of their coats steaming gently in the damp air, the leather of their harnesses, the faint, sour tang of their breath after drinking the cold water. These smells combine into a single, complex atmosphere that is the smell of the journey itself, and you breathe it in deeply without thinking, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The dark bay, now rested and watered, turns its head and looks at you with its large, dark eyes. And there is something in that look that is not impatience but simply a quiet readiness, a calm acknowledgement that the pause is over and the road continues. You rise to your feet, your knees stiff from kneeling on the cold ground, and you take up the lead rein again, holding it loosely in your hand. The leather is damped now, and it feels different against your palm, cooler and smoother than it did before. You click your tongue softly, a small two-note sound that is not a command but a kind of greeting, and the bay steps forward, its hooves squelching in the soft ground around the trough. The track resumes on the far side of the clearing, a narrow, winding ribbon of darker earth that climbs away from the spring and disappears almost immediately into the mist. The gradient here is a little steeper, and you feel it in the new effort that the horses put into their steps. A slight deepening of their breathing, a tiny increase in the speed of the harness creak. The mist absorbs these sounds and muffles them, so that the train seems to be climbing in a bubble of silence, the outside world completely erased by the white vapor. Your own breathing matches the pace of the horses. In and out, a slow, steady rhythm that you are barely aware of, but that fills your whole body with a gentle trance-like calm. The heather on either side of the track grows taller here, reaching almost to your waist in places, and its dark, woody stems brush against the bales as the horses pass, making a soft, scratchy sound that comes and goes. The track itself is so narrow that the horses must walk in single file now, and you lead the bay along the center of the path while the others follow behind, their lead ropes stretching out into the mist, like the links of a chain that loses itself in the whiteness. The chestnut, who is directly behind the grey, gives a small snorting cough as a piece of heather brushes its nose, and the sound is swallowed by the mist so quickly that you are not sure you heard it at all. The light has not changed since the village, but the quality of it is different here on the high moor. It is a flat, directionless light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, a pale, silvery glow that has no source and casts no shadow. The world is reduced to shades of grey and brown and the deep, muted purple of the heather, and there is no colour anywhere that could be called bright or warm. Yet the landscape is not bleak. It is simply quiet, a place of soft tones and gentle contrasts, a place that asks nothing of the eye and rewards it with a calm, unvarying beauty that seeps into the mind like the mist itself. You walk on, step after step after step, and the track rises and falls in gentle undulations that follow the contour of the hill. Sometimes the ground underfoot is firm and rocky, the stones ringing under the horses' hooves with a clear, sharp sound. Sometimes it is soft and boggy, the peat squelching and sucking at your boots and causing the horses to slow and pick their way with extra care. The transition between these surfaces is always gradual, never sudden, and you adjust to each one without having to think, the way a sailor adjusts to the changing motion of the sea. The bay knows the track as well as you do, perhaps better, and it picks the firmest ground with an instinct that seems to come from the hoof itself, finding the hidden ridges of rock and the raised tussocks that will support its weight without sinking. The endless grey sky presses down on the moor with a soft, gentle weight, and the mist continues to drift and shift in slow, aimless currents that reveal and conceal the landscape in turns. Now and then, a gap opens in the vapour and you glimpse a wider view, a distant slope of the hill, a dark patch of peat hag, the pale gleam of a stream running through a rocky gully far below. But these glimpses are brief, lasting only a few heartbeats before the mist closes in again and the world contracts once more to the small circle of track and heather and horses that has been your entire reality for the last hour. You do not try to look for landmarks because the mist would hide them anyway, and you do not worry about the path because the track is worn so deeply into the moor that you could follow it blindfolded by the texture of the ground alone. The hours of the morning are passing, but you have no way of measuring them except by the slow internal clock of your own body. The ache in your legs is a little deeper now. The warmth of the walking has spread through your chest and arms, and the hunger you felt briefly in the stable yard has returned as a dull, distant sensation that you acknowledge and then set aside. You will eat when you reach the drover's inn on the high shelf of the moor, but that is still some distance away, somewhere ahead in the mist, and there is no use in thinking about it. The only thing that exists is the next step, and the next, and the next, each one following the last, in a seamless flow that has no beginning and no end. The dark bay's breath comes in steady, visible puffs that merge with the mist and disappear, and the steam from its shoulders rises in thin, wispy tendrils that curl around the edges of the bales. You place your hand on the horse's neck for a moment, feeling the heat and the damp and the steady, living pulse of blood beneath the skin. And the bay leans very slightly into your touch, a tiny, almost imperceptible pressure that is the only communication you need. Behind you, the grey and the chestnut and the half-brothers and the old grey mare continue their patient, endless walking, their hooves falling into the same slow rhythm that they have followed since the village, their load swaying and creaking in the muffled silence of the mist. The track climbs on, and you climb with it, and the world is very small and very quiet and very still. The track narrows so gradually that you do not notice the change until the heather on either side is brushing against the bales with a constant, scratchy whisper that no longer comes and goes but stays. What was a path wide enough for two horses to walk abreast has become a single winding thread of bare earth and loose stone that snakes upward into the mist with no visible destination. The walls of the valley have drawn closer too, though you cannot see them clearly through the vapor, and you feel their presence as a kind of pressure on either side, a closing in of the landscape that funnels the track upward toward the unseen saddle of the pass. The air itself feels different here, thinner and sharper, and each breath you draw carries a faint, cold edge that was not present on the lower slopes. You are walking now beside the old grey mare, having moved back along the train an hour ago when the track first began to steepen. The mare knows the pass better than any horse in your string, having crossed it more than 100 times in her long life, and she walks with a slow, unshakable steadiness that makes her the natural leader for the hardest section of the climb. The dark bay, who led the train out of the village and up the lower track, has been moved to the middle of the line, where it follows the chestnut and is followed by the grey pony and the half-brothers in a new order that places the strongest, most experienced horses at the front and rear. You rearranged the train on a wide, flat stretch of ground where the track briefly leveled out, untying and retying the connecting ropes with cold, patient fingers, and the horses accepted the new arrangement without fuss, simply adjusting their positions and waiting for the signal to move on. The old grey mare walks with her head low, her nose almost touching the ground, as she surveys each stone and hollow before committing her weight to it. Her ears are pricked forward, not with alertness but with a kind of deep, focused attention that has nothing to do with fear or uncertainty, and everything to do with the careful, ancient wisdom of an animal that has learned to trust only the ground beneath her feet. The lead rein in your hand is slack because you do not guide the mare, you merely walk beside her, and she chooses the path, and you follow. The 3 linen bundles of lamb's wool on the top of her load bob gently with each step, their pale wrappings now beaded with mist and darkened slightly where the moisture has soaked into the outer fibers. The gradient has become the steepest of the journey so far, a long, unrelenting incline that pulls at the muscles of your legs with a steady, deep burn. You lean forward into the slope, your body tilted at the same angle as the mare's neck, and your breathing has deepened to match the pace of the climb. The air is cold enough now that every exhale produces a thick white cloud that hangs around your face for a moment before the mist absorbs it, and you can see the same white plumes rising from the mare's nostrils in a slow, rhythmic pulse. The steam from her flanks is thicker here than it was on the lower track, a constant, gentle evaporation that rises through the canvas pads and mingles with the vapor of the air, so that the horse seems to be wrapped in her own small, private weather system. The track has become a series of irregular stone steps, not built by human hands, but worn into the hillside by centuries of water and hooves, and the slow, patient work of frost. The stones are dark and slick with moisture, their surfaces polished to a dull gleam by the passage of countless packhorse trains before yours, and they are set at uneven intervals that force the horses to adjust their stride with every step. The old grey mare manages this with a careful, deliberate rhythm, placing each hoof precisely on the flattest part of each stone, her fetlocks bending deeply as she pushes upward, her hindquarters working with a steady, powerful motion that makes the muscles beneath her wet coat shift and bunch. The pause between each step is a fraction longer than it was on the lower ground, and the silence between hoofbeats stretches out into a slow, measured cadence that matches the thin, high air. The mist has grown thicker as you've climbed, or perhaps you've simply climbed into the thickest part of it, and the visible world has shrunk to a circle no more than 20 yards across. The heather on either side of the track is a dark, sodden mass that seems to absorb the light rather than reflect it, and the scattered rocks that jut from the hillside are black with moisture and covered with a fine grey lichen that grows in intricate circular patterns like the maps of tiny, forgotten countries. There is no birdsong at this height, no curlew call, no flutter of wings in the heather. The only sounds are the sounds of the train, the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the horses, the scrape and clack of their hooves on the wet stone, the creak and groan of the leather harnesses under the strain of the climb, and the soft, constant rustle of the bales swaying against their ropes. The old grey mare pauses for a moment on a slightly wider step, where the track makes a sharp turn around an outcrop of dark, glistening rock, and you stop beside her, your hand moving automatically to rest on her steaming neck. The skin is hot and damp under your palm, and you can feel the pulse of blood in the great artery that runs along the crest of her neck. A deep, slow beat that is as steady as the ticking of the tall case clock in the drover's inn you will reach later in the day. The mare turns her head slightly toward you, her large dark eye meeting yours for a moment, and there is no expression in it that you can name, only the calm, patient acceptance of an animal that has done this work all her life and will continue to do it as long as she is able. Then she faces forward again and resumes the climb, her hooves finding the next stone step and the next, and you walk on beside her. The track enters a section where the ground on one side drops away sharply into a gully that you cannot see but that you know is there. The edge is marked by a line of low, wind-twisted thorn bushes that cling to the rocks with gnarled, exposed roots, their branches all leaning in the same direction, away from the prevailing wind. The mist in the gully is thinner, or perhaps the gully channels the air in a way that draws the vapor downward, and you catch a brief fragmentary glimpse of the depths. A dark vertical slash of rock and loose scree, a thin ribbon of white water tumbling over stones far below, a patch of intensely green moss that glows like an emerald in the grey light. Then the mist closes again and the view is gone, and the track continues its narrow, winding way along the edge. You pull the hood of your cloak closer round your face, drawing it forward until only your eyes and the bridge of your nose are exposed to the air. The wool is warm and damp, and smells of the peat smoke from the cottage, and the pressure of it against your cheeks is oddly comforting. A small enclosing shelter in the vast openness of the high pass. The mist condenses on the outer surface of the hood, and on the shoulders of your cloak, and on the coarse hair of the mare's mane, and the whole world is covered in a fine silver fur of moisture that makes everything look soft and blurred and slightly unreal. The bales on the horses' backs continue to hold their shape with the same solid, unyielding firmness they had in the loading yard. You glance back along the train and see them rising and falling with the motion of the horses, their sacking darkened to a deep chocolate brown by the damp, their lead seals glinting faintly in the diffused light. The ropes that hold them are still tight, the diamond hitches still secure, and the loads have not shifted by so much as a finger's width since you left the village. This is the reward of the slow, careful loading you performed in the yard, the patient work of knotting and tightening that seemed so repetitive at the time, but that now reveals its purpose in the solid, unwavering stability of the packs. You pass a small cairn of stones that has been built at the side of the track, a simple pile of flat grey rocks that stands about waist-high and serves as a waymarker for travellers in the mist. The cairn is very old, and its stones are covered with the same fine grey lichen that grows on the outcrops, and in the crevices between them, small hardy plants have taken root, their leaves thick and waxy and dark green. You touch the topmost stone with your fingers as you pass, a small automatic gesture that you have made every time you have crossed this pass, and the stone is cold and wet and smooth under your fingertips. The old grey mare, whose ancestors carried packs over these hills long before you were born, does not glance at the cairn. She knows the way without markers. Beyond the cairn, the track descends very slightly for a short distance, a brief welcome respite where the horses can relax their straining muscles and walk with a longer, easier stride. The ground here is softer, a stretch of deep, peaty earth where the water has collected in shallow pools that reflect the pale sky with a strange, milky brightness. The horses step around the pools with the automatic care of animals that dislike wet feet, and the reflections shatter into ripples as the edge of a hoof passes too close, then slowly reform into stillness after the last horse has gone by. The pools are rimmed with a bright emerald green moss that grows in thick spongy cushions, and here and there the dark leathery leaves of bog myrtle rise from the water, giving off a faint, spicy fragrance when the horse's legs brush against them. The respite is brief. The track turns upward again almost immediately, climbing now toward the highest point of the pass, the true watershed where the streams divide and the water flows either east to the river port or west back toward the village and the sea beyond. You feel the altitude not in the burning of your lungs, which are accustomed to this work, but in a subtle, pervasive lightness in your head, a slight thinning of the air that makes the world seem a little more distant, a little more dreamlike. The silence at this height is different from the silence of the lower moor. It is a deeper, emptier silence, a silence that seems to have weight and substance, pressing in on your ears with a gentle, constant pressure. The old grey mare's breathing has become more audible now, a deep, rhythmic grunt that accompanies each step, a sound that is not of distress but of steady, sustained effort. It is the sound of a horse working well within its capacity, finding the deep, slow rhythm that allows it to climb indefinitely. And it is a sound you have heard many times before, on many passes, in the company of many horses. You match your own breathing to the mare's, unconsciously synchronizing the rise and fall of your chest with the rise and fall of hers, and the two of you climb together in a shared, wordless cadence that has no need for communication. Water drips steadily from the mare's belly, not sweat, but condensed mist that has collected on the coarse hair of her underside and now runs down in slow, cold rivulets that darken the insides of her legs. The same water drips from the edges of the bales and from the hem of your cloak and from the tip of your nose, and the whole train is a moving sculpture of moisture and wool and leather. A slow procession of dripping, steaming, patient animals, and one man climbing through the mist toward the invisible sky. The sound of the dripping is everywhere, a soft, irregular patter that blends with the breathing and the hoofbeats and the creaking of the harnesses into a single, complex music that is the music of the high pass. You pass the watershed without any marker to tell you where it is, without any change in the terrain or the mist or the sound of the wind, but you know it from the direction of the small trickling streams that cross the track. At first the water in the shallow runnels flowed to your left, back toward the valley you had left behind. Now, after a long, gradual curve of the track, the water flows to your right, eastward, toward the distant sea and the river port, that is still many miles and many hours away. You notice this without stopping, without even breaking your stride, and the knowledge settles into you like a stone into water, a small, quiet fact that requires no acknowledgement. The track begins to level out now, not all at once, but in a series of decreasing undulations that gradually lose their steepness and become a broad, gently rolling plateau of dark peat and scattered rocks. The mist is still thick, but the ground underfoot has changed again. The stone steps have given way to a soft, springy surface of sphagnum moss and wiry grass that cushions the horses' hooves and muffles their footsteps. The silence grows even deeper, the sound of the train reduced to the faintest whisper of leather and the soft, wet squelch of the moss underfoot. The old grey mare slows her pace without being asked, and you slow with her, and the climb that has occupied your whole body and mind for what feels like hours is suddenly, gently over. You have reached the roof of England, the high, empty tableland that stretches between the eastern and western valleys, a place of rolling mists and dark peat hags and small gleaming tarns that appear and disappear in the shifting vapour. It is a place of profound, unbroken stillness, a landscape that seems to exist outside of time, where the only signs of human passage are the faint, winding tracks that cross the moor and the occasional cairn of stones that stands against the sky like a silent sentinel. You walk on across the plateau, the old grey mare still leading, and the mist closes around you like a curtain, and the world is reduced once again to the small, moving circle of your own journey, step after step after step, toward the long descent that waits on the other side. The Drover's Inn appears out of the mist so gradually that you do not see it as a building at first, but as a darkening of the grey air, a solid shape that slowly resolves into walls and a roof and a thin, wavering column of smoke. It stands on a high shelf of the moor where the track widens into a broad, flat yard of packed earth and gravel, a place that has been a stopping point for travellers crossing the Pennine passes for longer than any written record can say. The inn is low and long, built of the same dark, undressed stone as the cottages in the village you left behind, and its roof is of heavy slate that glistens with the perpetual damp of the high moor. The windows are small and deeply recessed, their thick greenish glass catching the pale light in a way that makes them look like blocks of ice, and the chimney at the western end sends up a steady grey plume of peat smoke that rises straight for a few yards before the mist takes it and bends it sideways into nothing. The yard is empty of other travellers when you arrive, though the marks of their passing are everywhere. The earth is churned into a pattern of hoof prints and cartwheel ruts, and the broad, flat impressions of packhorse trains that have stood here waiting while their porters took their own rest inside. puddles the color of weak tea fill the deepest of these impressions, and the surface of each puddle is dusted with a fine, floating layer of chaff and straw that trembles when the breeze moves. A wooden water trough, much larger than the stone basin at the spring, runs along one side of the yard, fed by a pipe of hollowed elm that brings water from a stream higher up the slope, and the trough is green with algae on the inside and worn smooth on the lip where generations of horses have rested their chins while drinking. You lead the old grey mare into the yard and stop in the center of the open space, and the rest of the train files in behind you, each horse lifting its head a little as it recognizes the place, the pause, the promise of rest. The dark bay, now in the middle of the string, lets out a low, rumbling nicker that is answered by a horse somewhere inside the inn stable, a brief, musical exchange that fades into the silence as quickly as it arose. You untie the connecting ropes that link the horses together, working your way down the train with the same slow, methodical care with which you tied them, and one by one the horses become individuals again, free to move and stretch and shake the moisture from their coats. The chestnut does exactly this, planting all 4 feet wide and giving a great, shuddering shake that starts at its head and travels in a wave down its body to its tail, sending a fine spray of water droplets into the air that hangs for a moment like a small, private rainstorm. You do not remove the packs because the halt will not be long enough to justify the work of unloading and reloading, but you loosen the surcingles on each horse, easing the tension on the buckles so that the straps no longer press tightly against the animals' bellies. The horses sigh when you do this, great, deep exhalations that seem to release the tension of the climb as much as the tension of the straps, and they lower their heads and stand with a new, looser posture, resting their hind legs in turn. You tie each horse to the long wooden rail that runs along the front of the inn, a rail worn to a smooth, dark polish by the rubbing of countless halters and lead ropes, and you slip a canvas nosebag of oats over each head, working from the old grey mare at one end to the dark bay at the other. The horses bury their muzzles in the bags with a soft, contented crunching, and the sound of oats being ground between strong, flat teeth fills the yard with a steady, gentle rhythm. The inn door is low and broad, made of vertical oak planks studded with heavy iron nails, and it swings inward when you push it with your shoulder, releasing a gust of warm, smoky air that wraps around your face and makes your chilled skin tingle. You step inside and stand for a moment just within the doorway, letting your eyes adjust from the pale grey light of the yard to the deep brown dimness of the interior. The room is long and low-ceilinged, its beams blackened with centuries of smoke, and the floor is of stone flags worn into shallow, uneven hollows by the passage of countless boots. The only light comes from the fire that burns in a wide open hearth at the far end of the room, its flames casting a soft, orange glow that flickers across the walls and ceiling in slow, lazy waves, and from 2 tallow candles that burn on a wooden shelf behind the innkeeper's table. The innkeeper is a broad, slow-moving man, with a face that has been weathered by years of moorland wind and indoor smoke into a deep reddish brown. He nods to you as you enter, a small, economical gesture that acknowledges your presence without requiring anything of you, and he turns to a barrel that stands on a stand behind his table and begins to draw a cup of ale without being asked. You cross the room to the hearth, your boots making a soft, gritty sound on the warm stones, and you sit on a low wooden bench that has been pulled close to the fire. The bench is smooth and dark from long use, and it creaks faintly under your weight, a small, familiar sound that is swallowed by the larger, softer sounds of the fire. The fire is made of peat and a single, slow-burning log of birch that rests on a pair of iron firedogs, and its flames are low and steady, a deep orange red that seems to pulse rather than flicker. The peat gives off a thick, sweet smoke that rises in a dense column and disappears into the chimney, and the birch log hisses softly as the moisture inside it turns to steam and escapes through the bark. The heat of the fire presses against your face and chest and hands, a deep, penetrating warmth that slowly eases the cold that has settled into your bones during the long climb, and you sit motionless, letting the warmth soak into you like water into dry earth. The innkeeper brings your ale, a brown earthenware cup filled with a dark, almost black liquid that has a thin, creamy head and a smell of roasted barley and wild yeast. You wrap your cold hands around the cup and feel the warmth of the ale through the thick clay, and you take a slow, careful sip. The ale is warm and slightly flat, the way ale always tastes at these high isolated inns, and it has a deep, malty sweetness that is cut by a faint, pleasant bitterness at the back of the throat. You drink slowly, letting each mouthful linger, and the ale settles in your empty stomach with a warm, gentle weight. A plate of food appears on the bench beside you, placed there by the innkeeper's wife, a quiet woman in a woolen kirtle and a linen coif who moves through the dim room as silently as a shadow. The plate is of dark, glazed earthenware, and on it is a thick slice of coarse brown bread, a wedge of hard, pale cheese that crumbles slightly at the edges, and a small wrinkled apple that has been stored through the winter in a cellar of straw. You thank her with a nod, and she nods back, her face expressionless but not unfriendly, and she retreats into the darker recesses of the room where a tall case clock ticks with a slow, steady beat. The bread is dense and slightly sour, made from a mixture of rye and barley flour, and it requires a firm, deliberate chew that works the muscles of your jaw with a slow, satisfying rhythm. The cheese is sharp and salty, made from the milk of the ewes that graze the high pastures in summer, and it crumbles on your tongue with a dry, granular texture that releases its flavor in stages, first the salt, then the deeper, nutter taste of the aged curd. The apple is small and speckled and slightly soft from its long storage, but when you bite into it, the flesh is still sweet and faintly tart, and the juice runs down your chin in a thin, cold trickle that you wipe away with the back of your hand. You eat slowly, without thought, the food occupying your hands and mouth in a way that is deeply, wordlessly satisfying. The room around you is quiet, but it is not the empty quiet of the high pass. It is a populated quiet, a quiet that contains the small, soft sounds of other people resting. Two drovers are asleep on a long settle against the far wall, their heads pillowed on their folded cloaks, their breathing deep and slow and regular. A third man, a packman like yourself, sits at a table in the corner with a cup of ale and a wooden tally stick that he turns over and over in his fingers, his eyes fixed on the fire with the distant, unfocused gaze of a man whose thoughts are far away. The innkeeper moves softly behind his table, wiping cups with a cloth and stacking them on a wooden shelf, and the tall case clock in the corner ticks its slow, patient seconds into the warm, smoky air. The fire shifts with a soft, crumbling sound as a piece of peat collapses inward on itself, and a shower of orange sparks rises up the chimney in a brief, bright swirl before disappearing into the darkness. You watch the sparks rise and fade, and your mind, which has been quiet and empty since the climb, drifts into a state of even deeper calm, a state in which the boundary between yourself and the warm, dim room seems to blur and soften. The ticking of the clock, the breathing of the sleeping drovers, the soft clink of the innkeeper's cups, the distant, muffled sound of the horses crunching their oats outside in the yard, all these sounds merge into a single, gentle texture that fills your ears and asks nothing of your attention. The tall case clock measures the hour with a low, sonorous chime that strikes twice, and the sound hangs in the air for a long moment before fading into the quiet. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or thereabouts, though the light outside the small windows has not changed since morning. The mist is still thick and pale, the sky still invisible, the sun still a vague brightness, somewhere far above the cloud. Time at the Drovers Inn moves differently than it does on the track, slower and more fluid, and you could not say how long you had been sitting by the fire. It might be half an hour, or it might be much longer. There is no way to tell, and it does not matter. You finish the last of the bread and cheese, picking the crumbs from the plate with a damp finger and eating them one by one, and you drink the last of the ale, tilting the cup back until the dregs, thick with yeast, slide slowly down the inside of the clay and touch your lips. The dregs are bitter and grainy, and you swallow them without pleasure, but also without distaste. You set the empty cup on the floor beside the bench and lean back against the rough stone of the wall, your shoulders finding a natural hollow between two projecting stones, and you close your eyes for a moment, though you do not sleep. The warmth of the fire plays across your closed eyelids in shifting patterns of red and orange, and you feel the heat sinking deeper into your body, reaching the cold places that the climb did not warm, the spaces between your shoulder blades and the tops of your thighs and the soles of your feet. A mouse rustles in the thatch above your head, a tiny scratching sound that comes and goes, and you hear the innkeeper's wife moving in the back room, the soft, rhythmic sound of a broom sweeping a stone floor, the gentle clatter of a pot being moved. One of the sleeping drovers shifts on the settle and mutters something unintelligible in his sleep, a low, formless murmur that subsides into silence, and the other drover sighs and turns onto his side, the leather of his jerkin creaking with the movement. The packman in the corner finishes his ale and sets the cup down with a soft, definite thud, and he rises and walks to the door, pausing for a moment to look back at the fire, his face briefly illuminated by its glow, and then he pushes the door open and steps out into the grey light of the yard, letting in a cold draught of air that makes the candle flames bend and shiver before the door swings shut and the room settles back into its warm stillness. You open your eyes after a while, though you could not say how long your eyes were closed, and you look around the room with the slow, unfocused gaze of a man who is not looking for anything in particular. The fire has burned lower, the birch log now reduced to a glowing, white-hot skeleton that is slowly crumbling into ash, and the peat has settled into a deep, pulsing bed of embers that throw out a steady, even heat. The innkeeper has retreated into the back room, and the only other person still in the main room is one of the sleeping drovers, the other having departed at some point without waking you. The tall case clock continues its slow, unwavering tick, and the candle flames stand upright and still in the draughtless air. You rise from the bench slowly, your body stiff from sitting still on the hard wood, and you stretch your arms above your head, feeling the muscles of your shoulders and back pull and then release. The stiffness is a good kind of stiffness, the kind that comes from hard work and rest in equal measure, and it will ease as soon as you begin to walk again. You cross to the innkeeper's table and place a small coin on the worn dark wood, a silver penny that has been clipped and worn until the king's head is barely visible, and the innkeeper, who has returned from the back room without a sound, picks it up and nods, his face as expressionless as ever. You step outside into the yard, and the cold, damp air meets you like a wall after the warmth of the inn. The mist has not lifted, but it has thinned a little, and the yard is now visible in its entirety. A broad, open space bounded by low stone walls and the dark shape of the stable block. The horses stand where you left them, their nose bags empty now, their heads drooping in various stages of rest. The old grey mare has her eyes closed and her lower lip slack, and a thin thread of saliva hangs from her muzzle, catching the light like a strand of silver. The dark bay is dozing too, but it opens its eyes when you approach, and its ears swivel forward in a small, quiet greeting. You remove the empty nosebags and hang them over the rail to dry, and you tighten the surcingles on each horse with the same careful, even pressure you used when you loosened them, pulling each strap snug against the canvas pads and tucking the loose ends through the keepers. The horses accept the tightening without protest, standing still and patient, and the old grey mare opens her eyes and blinks slowly, her lashes long and pale against the dark grey of her face. You check each load by pressing against the bales with the flat of your hand, feeling for any give or shift, and you find none. The ropes have held, the hitches have stayed tight, and the wool is as solid and secure as it was when you left the village. You untie the horses from the rail and reconnect them in the same order they walked before, the old grey mare at the front, then the chestnut, then the dark bay, then the grey pony, then the two half-brothers at the rear. You work slowly, taking your time with each knot, and the horses stand quietly, their breath steaming in the cold air, their ears flicking occasionally at some small sound from the moor. When all the knots are tied and all the ropes are checked, you take your place beside the old grey mare and rest your hand on her neck, feeling the warmth of her coat and the slow, steady pulse of her blood. The inn stands behind you, its chimney still sending up its thin column of smoke, its windows still glowing with the faint, warm light of the hearth. The pause is over now, and the long descent waits ahead, the track that will carry you down from the high moor and into the sheltered valley where the river port lies. You click your tongue softly, the same small two-note sound you made at the spring, and the old grey mare steps forward, her hooves squelching in the soft, churned earth of the yard. The train moves out into the mist once more, and the inn fades behind you into the grey, and the road stretches ahead, sloping gently downward toward the unseen river and the end of the journey. The track begins its downward tilt so gently that at first you mistake it for a flat stretch of the same high plateau you have been crossing since the Drovers Inn, but your legs know the difference before your eyes do. There is a subtle shift in the way your weight falls on each step, a slight easing of the effort that has been required since the climb began, and the old grey mare at your side feels it too, her stride lengthening by a fraction, her head lifting just enough to bring her ears to a more relaxed angle. The mist is still thick around you, but the quality of the air has begun to change, a slow, almost imperceptible warming that you notice first as a softening of the cold on your cheeks, a gentleness in the vapour that was not there on the high pass. You walk beside the mare with the lead rein held loosely in your hand, your boots finding the downward slope with the automatic ease of a man who has walked this descent many times. And the horses behind you adjust their own gaits to the new angle, the sound of their hooves changing from the soft, sucking squelch of the peat to a firmer, crisper tread as the ground dries and hardens underfoot. The track is still narrow, still winding, still hemmed in by dark heather and the occasional jutting outcrop of wet, glistening rock. But the gradient has shifted everything just slightly, tipping the whole world a few degrees toward the east and the unseen river that flows somewhere below. The mist begins to thin as you descend, not all at once, but in stages, opening small shifting windows of clarity that close again before you can quite see through them. A shoulder of the hill appears briefly to your left, a long smooth slope of pale winter grass dotted with the dark shapes of grazing sheep. And then the mist closes and the sheep are gone. A patch of sky shows overhead, a pale, watery blue that seems impossibly bright after the grey of the high moor, and then the vapour rolls back and the sky is swallowed again. The transitions are slow and gentle, the mist moving in lazy billowing waves that drift across the landscape like a living thing, revealing and concealing, giving glimpses of the lower country that make you aware of how far you have climbed and how far you still have to go. The heather on either side of the track grows shorter as you descend, giving way first to coarse, tussocky grass and then to a low, springy turf that is studded with the small, bright green leaves of bilberry and the darker, spikier fronds of young bracken. The scent of the moor changes too, the sharp, peaty tang of the high ground gradually replaced by a softer, earthier smell that has in it a hint of leaf mould, and the faint, sweet fragrance of the first gorse flowers opening in the sheltered hollows. A breeze springs up from the east, a light, fitful wind that carries a suggestion of warmth and the distant, almost imperceptible smell of the tidal river. A scent that is part mud and part salt and part the clean, green smell of the reeds that grow along the banks. The track widens now, spreading out from the single narrow thread of the pass to a broader, more defined path that has clearly been used by wagons as well as pack horses. Its surface cut into two parallel ruts that run side by side with a ridge of grass between them. The ruts are old and deep, worn into the earth by the iron tires of the carriers' carts that travel this road in the drier months, and they are filled with loose, rounded stones that have been washed down from the higher slopes by the winter rains. The horses step into the ruts automatically, the old grey mare taking the left rut, while the rest of the train follows in single file behind her, their hooves making a steady, rhythmic clatter on the loose stones, a sound that echoes softly off the hidden slopes around you. The first trees appear as you round a long, sweeping bend in the track, a small copse of wind-twisted birch that cling to the side of the hill with exposed silver roots, their branches still bare of leaves, but tipped with the tiny dark buds that will open in another month. The trees are the first you have seen since leaving the village, and they mark a threshold, a transition from the treeless, open moor to the more sheltered country of the lower slopes. Beyond the birches, the track enters a stretch of ancient coppice, a woodland of oak and hazel that has been cut and regrown in a cycle that stretches back beyond living memory. The trees are gnarled and thick, their trunks covered with a pale grey-green lichen that grows in intricate, overlapping circles, and their branches tangle overhead in a dense, bare canopy that filters the grey light into a soft, dappled pattern on the track below. The sound of the train changes again as you enter the coppice, the open silence of the moor replaced by a closer, more intimate quiet that is full of small soft noises, the drip of water from the bare branches, the rustle of a bird in the undergrowth, the hollow tap of a woodpecker somewhere deeper in the trees. The horse's hooves make a deeper, duller sound on the leaf-covered earth of the woodland floor, and the bales brush against the low-hanging twigs with a series of soft, scratchy whispers that come and go. The air is warmer here in the shelter of the trees, and the mist has thinned to a fine hazy veil that hangs in the branches like smoke, catching the light in long slanting shafts that angle down through gaps in the canopy and illuminate patches of moss and fern with a pale silvery glow. You walk through the coppice for what feels like a long time, the track winding gently downward between the old gnarled trees, and the rhythm of the descent settles into your body with the same steady trance-like quality that the climb had. Your breathing is easy now, your legs moving with a loose automatic stride that requires no thought, and your mind drifts in the quiet space between the sounds of the woodland, touching on nothing, holding nothing. The horses behind you are equally calm, their breathing slow and even, their harnesses creaking with a softer, more muted sound than they made on the steep climb, and the bales on their backs sway with the gentle rolling motion of the descent. The coppice gives way to more open country as the track emerges from the trees and crosses a series of small, walled fields that step down the hillside in a patchwork of pale winter grass and dark, ploughed earth. The walls here are different from the high dry stone walls of the moor. They are lower and thicker, built of rounded river stones that have been gathered from the water and set into rough, irregular courses, and they are topped with a thick, cushiony layer of moss and grass that has seeded itself over many years and now forms a soft green coping that spills over the edges. Sheep graze in the fields, their fleeces the same grey-brown as the winter grass, and they lift their heads to watch the train pass with the calm and curious gaze of animals that have seen many pack-horse trains before and will see many more. The track has become a proper road now, its surface metalled with small crushed stones that have been compacted by the passage of carts and wagons into a firm, even surface that crunches underfoot with a satisfying, rhythmic sound. Stone gateposts stand at the field boundaries, tall, square pillars of dressed sandstone with iron hinges that once held heavy wooden gates, though the gates themselves are long gone, leaving only the empty hinges and the dark rectangular stains on the stone where the wood used to press. You pass through these gateways without pause, the horses filing through the narrow openings one at a time, and the road continues its gentle, winding descent toward the valley floor. The sky has continued to clear as you have descended, and now, as the road emerges from the last of the walled fields and begins to follow the contour of the valley side, you can see a long way across the lower country. The mist has lifted entirely, leaving only a few ragged white clouds that drift slowly across a sky that is the color of pale watered milk, and the valley below is spread out before you, like a map drawn in shades of brown and grey, and the faint, muted green of the first spring grass. The river is visible now, a broad silver ribbon that winds through the center of the valley, its surface so still and flat that it reflects the pale sky with perfect fidelity, broken only where the current moves faster around a bend and the surface shivers into 1,000 tiny, sparkling ripples. The river port is a cluster of grey buildings that stand at the river's edge where the valley widens into a broad, flat plain, and from this distance it looks like a child's toy village, small and neat and perfectly still. Its roofs are uniform dark grey, its chimneys sending up thin threads of smoke that rise straight into the still air. A wooden quay projects out into the river, a long dark structure of heavy timber piles and thick planks, and beside it, tied up to the quay, is the flat-bottomed river keel that will carry your wool downstream to the sea. The keel is a long, shallow vessel with a single square mast and a small deckhouse at the stern, and it sits low in the water, its hull dark with tar and its gunwales painted a faded, rusty red. A man is moving on the deck, a small distant figure who is coiling a rope or adjusting a sail, and his movements are slow and unhurried, the movements of a man who has been waiting and will continue to wait until the time is right. You pause for a moment on the road, your hand resting on the old grey mare's neck, and you look down at the port and the river and the long, winding valley that stretches away to the east until it disappears into a blue-grey haze of distance. The sight is familiar as the track and the spring and the drover's inn, but it is no less calming for its familiarity, and you feel a quiet, wordless sense of completion beginning to settle into you, a knowledge that the end of the journey is close now, only a few more miles of this gentle, easy walking. The mare at your side shifts her weight and blows a long, soft breath through her nostrils, and the other horses stand patient behind her, their loads intact, their ropes still tight, their breathing slow and even in the quiet, warming air. The road descends the last of the hillside in a series of long, sweeping switchbacks that carry you down through a landscape of small farms and market gardens. The fields here smaller and neater than the rough pastures of the upper slopes. The earth in these fields is dark and rich, recently turned for the spring planting, and the smell of it rises up around you, a deep, fertile scent that is full of the promise of the coming season. Daffodils are blooming along the edges of the fields, their yellow heads nodding in the light breeze, and a blackbird sings from a hawthorn bush, its song a long, liquid sequence of notes that falls and rises and falls again. The sound is beautiful, and it passes through you without leaving a trace, simply another part of the quiet tapestry of the descent. The horses sense the nearness of the journey's end, or perhaps they simply sense the nearness of the river and the fresh water and the flat ground where they will be unloaded and turned out to rest. Their pace has quickened very slightly, a subtle, unconscious increase that you notice and gently restrain with a light pressure on the lead rein, because there is no reason to hurry and every reason to arrive as calmly as you have travelled. The old grey mare responds to the pressure immediately, slowing back to her steady, deliberate walk, and the rest of the train follows suit, the brief, quiet eagerness subsiding into the patient rhythm of the last mile. The road levels out at the bottom of the valley and runs straight now between low, grassy banks toward the edge of the port. The river is close, and you can hear its voice, a soft, liquid murmur that is quite different from the trickle of the spring on the moor or the rush of the stream in the gully, a deeper, broader sound that speaks of a great volume of water moving slowly and steadily toward the sea. The air is full of the river's scent, clean and cold and faintly metallic, and underneath it the sharper, saltier tang of the tidal flats that lie just a few miles downstream. Gulls are circling over the water, their white wings catching the pale light as they turn and glide, and their calls are high and thin and strangely mournful, a sound that belongs to the meeting place of river and sea. The port itself is quiet when you arrive, the streets between the grey stone buildings empty of people, the doors closed, the windows shuttered or dark. It is a small port, barely more than a village, and its life is governed by the tides and the arrival and departure of the riverboats, which come and go on a schedule that has nothing to do with the hours of the day. The quay is broad and solid, built of great, square timbers that have been darkened by water and weather to the colour of strong tea, and its surface is worn smooth by the passage of countless feet and the sliding of countless bales. The river keel is moored at the end, and the man you saw from the hillside is now sitting on a coil of rope, whittling a piece of wood with a small, sharp knife, the shavings curling up and falling into the water beside the hull. You lead the train onto the quay, the horses' hooves making a hollow drumming sound on the thick planks, and you stop beside the keel, the old grey mare standing with her head over the gunwale, her breath sending small, soft ripples across the still water between the boat and the quay. The boatman looks up from his whittling and nods, a slow, easy nod that is both a greeting and an acknowledgement that the wool has arrived, that the journey has been made, that the work is almost done. You nod back and you begin to untie the first of the ropes that hold the bales, your fingers working with the same slow, steady precision they have shown all day. Untying the hitches in the reverse order, you tied them, loosening the surcingles, lifting the bales down one by one onto the worn, dark planks of the quay. The unloading will take some time and the afternoon will deepen into evening while you work, but there is no hurry. The river will flow, the keel will sail on the tide, and the wool will find its way to the sea and the waiting ships, and the distant foreign markets that are only names to you, places you will never see and never need to see. The only thing that matters now is the gentle, careful work of completing the journey, the slow, methodical process of lifting and lowering and stacking, and the quiet, calm presence of the horses standing at the edge of the water, their breath steaming in the cooling air, their eyes half closed, their long, patient day drawing at last toward its close. The wooden quay stretches out into the river on thick, square piles of oak that have been driven deep into the mud of the riverbed more years ago than anyone can remember, and the planks beneath your boots are worn to a smooth, silvery grey that gleams with the damp of the late afternoon air. You lead the old grey mare onto the quay first, her hooves making a hollow drumming sound on the timber that carries out across the water and echoes softly off the stone buildings of the port. The river keel is tied up at the end, a long, flat-bottomed vessel with a single mast and the small deck-house at the stern, and the boatman has already set out the wooden gangplank that runs from the quay to the deck, a heavy plank of elm with crosswise battens nailed to it to give footing for the men who will carry the bales aboard. The boatman himself is a quiet, weathered man in a woolen cap and a heavy jerkin of oiled leather, and he rises from his coil of rope when he sees you coming, setting aside his whittling knife and the piece of pale, half-carved wood that he has been shaping into the figure of a bird or a fish, or perhaps nothing at all. He walks to the shore end of the gangplank and stands there with his hands in the pockets of his breeches, watching the train approach with the calm, patient expression of a man who has waited for many packhorse trains in his time, and will wait for many more. You nod to him, and he nods back, and no words pass between you, because none are needed. The work ahead is understood by both of you, its sequence and its rhythm as familiar as the turning of the tide. You tie the old grey mare to an iron ring set into one of the quay piles, and then you walk back along the train, untying the connecting ropes that link the horses together so that each one can be led to the quay in turn. The dark bay, the grey pony, the chestnut, the half-brothers. You untie each knot with the same slow, careful fingers that tied them hours ago on the misty track, and the ropes fall loose and are coiled over the saddle packs, their hemp fibers soft and damp from the long day's journey. The horses stand quietly on the solid ground before the quay, their heads low, their breathing slow and even, and the steam rises from their flanks in thin, wispy tendrils that catch the pale light and then dissolve. You lead the old grey mare forward until she stands beside the gangplank, her nose almost touching the worn elm plank, and you loosen the rope that holds the 3 linen bundles of lamb's wool on her top pack, working the knot with gentle, deliberate movements that do not jar or pull. The bundles come free one at a time, and you hand them across to the boatman, who carries them down the gangplank with a slow, rolling gait and stows them in the deck-house, where the most delicate cargo is kept. Then you turn to the main bales that sit on either side of the mare's pack saddle. You loosen the diamond hitch first, pulling the working end back through the loop you created this morning, and the rope releases with a soft, sighing sound, its tension dissipating into your hands. You let the rope fall to the quay and coil it at your feet, and then you loosen the surcingle, sliding the leather strap through the iron buckle until it hangs slack beneath the mare's belly. The first bale, the one on the near side, comes away from the saddle when you lift it, and you set it down on the edge of the quay, its weight settling onto the planks with a solid, muffled thump. The boatman takes one end and you take the other, and together you slide the bale down the gangplank, the sacking making a soft, scratchy sound against the wood, the weight of it pressing the plank down slightly so that the river water laps closer to the battens. The bale lands in the shallow hold of the keel with a deep, resonant thud that vibrates through the timbers of the hull, and the boatman guides it into place, shoving it with his shoulder until it rests against the forward bulkhead. You return to the mare and lift the second bale, the one on the off side, and the process repeats itself with the same quiet, measured rhythm. Lift, set down, slide, stow. The old grey mare stands motionless while you work, her eyes half closed, her ears